If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What are your true creepy and terrifying encounters with something you're convinced was paranormal, that still gives you chills?
Help me, I'm lost. I was living in a rural area in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I was probably 10 to 11 at this time. One night I'm sleeping in my room when I randomly and abruptly wake up for no reason. This phenomenon was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing more urgent, so I grudgingly forced myself to head that way. The bathroom is on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the light switch, and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Click, click, click. Finally, it shut completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched to the floor. At this point I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home except for my mom and myself. Then the white shape began whispering in a quiet man's voice, "Help me. I'm lost." I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't, and instead I barely said, "No," before this thing started running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. I remember saying, it's coming," and my mother's eyes going from dazed to alert in an instant. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure terror like that in my life, even to this day. She grabs me by the arms and pulls me into my room and slams the door. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listen. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tile. The kitchen featured a sliding glass door that sounded as if someone had thrown it open and then slammed it shut. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town for a while after that and never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones that each belonged to a child from the early 1900s. It unsettles me because what I heard that night was a man's voice, yet it sounded so unnatural. My mom still will not tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me that she is afraid the entity will know we are discussing it and will return. This experience is the first of many weird things that have happened in my life. So I was walking along a fairly rural road late at night, trying to get back home. As I was walking along, I noticed a man walking just behind me, probably 20 meters. I would rather not appear weird, so I didn't look back too much, but I definitely got a look at the person. He looked to be a fairly tall, if not very well built, man. As I continued to walk, eventually I realized the man was gone. No less than 5 minutes later, I saw a man standing on the side of the road once more, ahead of me. At this point I was pretty chilled. I knew it was the same person for sure. The shape and the way he stood, it was him. I, who am a 6-foot Latin man, who can bench 110 kilograms and has great cardio, and who plays rugby every second day, for reference, I'm not a pushover, but at this point I just wanted out, decided to run past him as fast as I could, and as I began to speed up, about 15 meters from me, he ran into the foliage on the side of the road at lightning speeds. Look, as I read this back, it seems like I'm bragging. I didn't mean it to come off like that, I just meant to show that I don't really ever get afraid of passing people at night. Furthermore, this road is not a street, this is a back road used to get to another small town, and there is no reason for anyone to be on the road, let alone at night. I'm the only person, to my knowledge, to ever be in this area. I'm just looking for an answer so I can go back without soiling my pants. After witnessing what I saw, I returned to that area with a machete but ultimately left as twilight approached. If anyone sees this, have a crack at it, I'm all ears. Thank you. I was riding and gathering cows one day when my dog started after something and ran over to a large sandstone rock, acting very strange. I rode over and found a very old-looking box buried in the sand. I dug it up and opened it to find a tea set, fully intact. Below that, a set of child-sized beaded moccasins, and part of an old doll. There was more inside, but I lost the stomach to see what else was in there, and I'd rather not be a grave robber. I sealed the box and reburied it. A year or so later, I thought I saw a little girl out of the corner of my eye riding past that spot, so I rode towards the motion I saw, and there was a small piece of the doll I had apparently dropped. I figured that was her way of letting me know I missed a piece, so I redigged and placed it back where it belonged. Haven't seen the little girl since then, but I always say hi when I ride past. I looked up the watermarks on the tea set, and it's from about the 1880s, about the time the first homesteaders in my area would have arrived. Pretty cool history no one else but me will probably ever see. This is a chilling village story that dates back to 1937. My grandfather narrated this story to me, and it is based on true incidents. He was from South Asia before coming to Canada. He told me that once he and his cousins were making a lot of noise, so the elders told them to go and find a donkey in order for them to go out of the house so that there would be some peace and quiet in the house. My grandfather was the youngest at the time, aged 7, and he had 5 cousins with him, the eldest being 15. It was 7 p.m. when they went out, and hence it was getting dark quickly in the village where they lived. The village was generally safe with no crime rate. This is an incident from 1937 when everyone in the village knew each other, and since it was a remote village, there were generally no crime rates. Anyway, the cousins had been looking for a donkey for a good half an hour but could not find one. While doing so, they had realized they were well away from the village boundary limits. They went so far that the village houses and lights could hardly be seen, and then they spotted a huge tree in the middle of nowhere. The tree was a strange sight since they were in a barren land where there were no trees, generally due to the landscape, other than a few shrubs here and there. They went near it, and one of the eldest cousins noted and pointed out the top of the tree. What they saw bamboozled them completely. They saw a very beautiful bride in an ornamental red wedding dress. According to my grandfather, they were so mesmerized with her beauty and especially her eyes that they could not stop staring at her. All of a sudden the bride started smiling at them and asked, "What is wrong? Do you like me? Should I come down?" They were looking at her and were about to respond when they noticed her legs starting to get elongated while coming down. Initially they felt frozen in their tracks, but when they noticed that her eyes were also widening and the smile getting wider and wider, they screamed, yelled, and started running away without looking back. The strangest thing is that all the while they could hear her shrieking laughter and shrill screams telling them she will be waiting for them to come back. The next few days, they all fell into high fever but recovered. Cloaked encounter in Mount Rainier National Park. As a college student, I was a long-time listener, but it wasn't until my best friend of 10 years and I embarked on a solo adventure in Mount Rainier National Park, in the upper left-hand corner of Washington State, U.S., that I had an unforgettable experience. I grew up in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania, and my neighborhood best friend of 11 years named Megan married a radar tech on a submarine for the U.S. Navy while I attended college for psych in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at Temple U, Go Owls. They are stationed in the Puget Sound area. I flew out for her birthday in late October and Halloween in Seattle. Mount Rainier is a large active stratovolcano. It is indeed on the decade volcano list, meaning it has been identified as significant because of its history of huge, harmful eruptions next to highly populated areas. Pretty much the day consisted of hours of driving through the Cascade Mountain Range. Things got weird after we reached the highest part we could reach, which was the Paradise Inn, at the Henry M. Jackson Memorial Visitor Center. Nothing was really open here as far as the inn went because it is late in the season, and as of November 1st, your vehicle must have changed to enter certain areas of the park because of the impending snow. Your car is almost always alone. You see a few other people at the stunning viewpoints, but it's chilly, so they are scattered here and there. After 30 minutes of swearing, we passed the same dead slanted birch tree at least 3 or 4 times. Our déjà vu was overwhelming. Driving slowly with our windows down, we reached a point in the mountains that I had lost track of on the map after taking a selfie of Megan while she was driving. I know we were somewhere after Paradise Inn because, as I can see in the pictures, the snow is sparse but still present. I am in the middle of asking my friend if she feels alright when the car in front of us slowed to stop quickly enough to make my body bounce off the seat. That is when we see a person, in a hood by the tree line. I still had the camera open, so I took a picture. I've lived in North Philly for 4 years, and never in my goddamn life have I ever felt a terror so severe and all-encompassing as how I felt at that moment. How I felt was more indicative of something's presence than someone's, I'll say that much. After the entity skittered off faster than anything I've ever seen, it vanished into silence. It definitely was wearing some type of long cloak with a hood. Its size was consistent with that of the person. I think what's bothering me is that in broad daylight, my friend and I could not make out any features. Sure as hell wasn't a hiker, though. Not many out-of-towners late in the season anyway. Megan keeps telling me she is sure it was about 5 feet tall. Did not see hands or arms, but the movement was quick. The car in front of us sped off so fast, We couldn't even ask if they also felt like they were in the twilight zone. When my husband goes to sleep, something in the hall stomps up and down and scratches or bangs on the walls. Picture frames will fly off the wall. If I'm home alone, something upstairs moves boxes and chairs around upstairs. One winter something kept going to the side of the house closest to my location and repeatedly slamming against it. It always knew where I was at night. A disembodied voice has on occasion started up at night from an empty room. This always happens just before my husband faints at work. I never find the source. And one night something slammed down so hard on the second floor that only that section of the house shook and felt so angry. Not downstairs. Just upstairs. And the invisible thing my animals keep watching intently at night. And the large thing that scratches at bedroom and bathroom doors with my dog is in bed with my husband. And the thing that keeps knocking stuff over in empty rooms. And the knocking inside the wall sounds at least medium dog size despite the wall space being too small for that. And whatever keeps grabbing my hair along that wall when I'm in bed. And the large thing that hangs out outside in the winter I still haven't identified. It scares my husband to death. The absolute most terrifying encounter has to be one that happened during an urbex in an abandoned hospital. I was given a tip about the hospital from a friend who's a cop. She claimed that no one on the force ever enters the property, let alone the buildings. She also claimed that even the security guards don't go in the building given the unsettling nature of experiences they've had there. So I decided to check it out. I was going through the secured psych ward, and suddenly right next to me the metal door sounded like someone was pounding on it. I'll admit I jumped at the sound. I mustered my courage and tried to see if the door would even open. It was rusted to the point that I couldn't even turn the knob. I pointed my flashlight through the window and saw nothing but only the all-encompassing inky void of night. I tried to be rational and told myself it was a draft or something. I decided to keep exploring. As I got deeper in that ward, I could still hear it being pounded on, and that confirmed my suspicion about it being a draft. As I was by the nurse's station in the center of the ward, some things I definitely couldn't explain, chalked up to wind or a draft, started happening. I was grabbing a bottle of water from my backpack, and suddenly I was surrounded by screams, laughs, and crying. This definitely wasn't a draft or anything. These had to have been made by a human being. I got the duck out of there as fast as possible. The boy in the corner. The following events are true. Growing up, my family has always had very strange experiences. For example, we'd hear strange knocks from empty rooms in our home, see things, etc. We moved, they followed. But at one point, mainly when I was around the age of 9, it got somewhat aggressive. When I was 9 we moved to a small town. The house was fairly small, and it was close to what appeared to be some type of woods, a real old times kind of place that didn't even have common stores. Around this time, my younger siblings were about 3 and 2. I've heard some people say that children are prone to seeing spirits and interacting with them, and I just used to think it was a joke. My younger siblings would often hang around in fully blacked out rooms, and whenever they were in there I could hear them speaking to something or someone, but I just played it off as them being playful. This kind of escalated over time, though. It went from them talking to them playing and giggling in dark rooms as if someone were there with them. We'd hear loud knocks on our door, but when we checked, no one would be there, and the doorbell would ring constantly, but as I said earlier, no one was there. However, one particular experience has remained in my mind and continues to bother me occasionally. One Saturday night my parents had a lot to drink. This was normal, as every Saturday they would unwind and have drinks. I remember playing the PS3 in my parents' room while they were asleep, and my baby brother decided to sit between my legs while I played. We sat there playing for a while before I noticed something was off. My little brother had always been kind of noisy, but after a while I noticed he hadn't made a sound for a while. This kind of shocked me, so I decided to mess with him for a bit and ask him why he was so quiet, but suddenly I noticed his eyes. My parents had a bathroom in their room, and if you sat in certain positions, you could see the interior of the bathroom from inside the bedroom. I noticed my brother's eyes were glued to the darkness that emitted from the open bathroom door. I shrugged it off for a while, but then I started to feel as if I should try and see what he was seeing. It avoided my gaze for a sec, but then I started to notice, as I looked into the darkness more and more, I could see it more vividly. There in the darkness of that corner sat a boy, skin as pale as snow, dark eyes, and clothes that resembled those of a pilgrim. My little brother didn't see anything wrong with this, as he was a baby, he sat there calmly, but I watched in fear for a while, frozen in terror. After a while, I started to cry and quickly grabbed my brother to flee to my older sister's bedroom. I was terrified and distressed as I tried to put into words what I had experienced, but I just kept crying. My sister comforted me and sat with us until the sun rose in the morning. It amazes me how clearly I can still remember it to this day. One story I heard was from a friend who would go out to a ranch with his dad and a couple of family friends to hunt. They would stay with an old man who lived out there by himself. He said the place was cursed by a bruja, witch, and she didn't like any of them being there. Every night, crows would swarm the house and try to find a way in, and the sliding glass door to the outside would start sliding open and closed. The first time they witnessed this, the old man told them not to worry about it because it happened every night, just not to go outside because that was the bruja trying to lure them out there. So they didn't, and for years it went on like this until the old man finally died. The people that found him said they found him on the couch with a sandwich in hand. He had been dead for a few days, the sliding glass door was wide open, the windows were all shattered, and crows had filled the house. They had been pecking, but they didn't even touch the sandwich. Another story I've heard is that an old ranch hand who had worked on this ranch for most of his life died while on the job, and now he haunts the place. He was particularly ornery when it came to littering, so now if anyone tosses out trash, even by accident, like if something falls out of the truck or you drop something and leave it, his ghost will pick that piece of garbage up and throw it at you. He lets you know not to mess with his place, lol. The next few stories that my grandmother told me are my favorite. She, my grandpa, and their 6 kids lived on the ranch that my grandpa worked on. It was either called High Lonesome, or that's just what my grandma called it. Grandpa would leave at the crack of dawn, and grandma would be left alone with the kids all day. They lived in a house that was perched on a little hill that overlooked a small canyon. She said every day at noon, she would hear what sounded like a stampede of cattle and then hooting and hollering. She said it sounded like Native Americans herding buffalo off the canyon. When she'd go out there, she'd find nothing, of course. Another time she said she was hanging clothes up to dry on the clothesline, not that far away from a small stream. 2 of my uncles, who were around 4 and 5, were playing in the dirt not far away from her when all of a sudden, she heard a woman crying in the direction of the stream. She instantly turned to look for the boys, who were not where she'd last seen them playing. She heard the woman crying again. This time, the woman wailed in Spanish, "My children." And all the hair on my grandma's body rose to high heaven. She looked at the stream and saw the boys trying to get into the water. She started screaming for them to come back to her, and as soon as they heard her voice, they hightailed it back to her and were inconsolably crying. They said they had heard my grandma calling to them from the water. Needless to say, she never let the kids near that stream again. Another story she told me was at a different ranch. She was learning to drive, and since the dirt road to their house looped around in a big circle to meet at the highway, she figured she would just stay on the dirt road and go round and round a few times. She decided to take the kids with her, so they all piled in this car and started down the road. A few miles away, they see a man, dressed in a nice suit with a suitcase at his feet, sitting on a big boulder. They wave at him, he waves back, and they keep on going. She mentioned that a few yards down the road, they saw the same man again, sitting on the same boulder, wearing the same suit and having the same suitcase. The kids are spooked, but nobody freaks out just yet. Then they round the curve of the dirt road and start heading back towards their house. They saw the man 2 more times. By the time they get to the house, everyone is freaked out, and my grandma calls my grandpa to go check to see if he can find the man. He goes out there, loops that dirty road 3 times, and says he never saw the man or even the boulder. Bit of a long one. So I and my friends were hanging out. This was a year ago, before COVID, and we decided to head to this weird abandoned place. So skip to when we actually got there. The second we opened the door, you could hear the faint scream of a little girl. We stupidly ignored it and kept going, exploring literally everything. So it's a pretty big place, and shit went down when we got to the 2nd floor. There was this old, creepy mirror in a red circle, which I refused to believe was blood. There were pentagrams all over the walls around it, and some messages that read "Get out of here while you still can or it's over now." We, being stupid, didn't leave and kind of talked to the mirror. I walked a little closer, and I saw a frickin' handprint just appear on the mirror. So I got scared but didn't back up. Then I felt something dripping down my face, so I looked in the mirror, and I didn't even see myself. It was a woman with burnt white skin, if that makes sense, and black eyes with long black hair, a typical ghost look. At the top of her head, there was an upside down cross slit in it, dripping blood. I was the only one who saw it, apparently. My friends all heard thuds and screams, and that's when we left. Still scares me. But, before we left, the door we came in was closed. We left it open. There was a really loud thud, almost as if something was being thrown, and then a high-pitched scream. I'm really sensitive to loud noises and screams, so I freaked out and pushed the door open and got the duck out of there. Lesson learned. So, when I was about 4 years old, I was hanging out with my cousins at our home in Mexico. I remember it being very late, and my dad and uncle were getting drunk when all of a sudden my uncle's Doberman started barking and whining. I remember feeling intense fear, and then my cousins, 2 of them under the age of 7, began to cry hysterically. I remember the table where my uncle and dad were drinking began to shake, and then, out of nowhere, the glasses on the table began to levitate and then popped. I heard loud whispering all around and recalled thinking that I must be going crazy. My mom and aunt began to pray, and that's all I remember. For years I was afraid of going into the kitchen in the dark. It made me super paranoid of ghosts. I couldn't even look in a mirror without being afraid of what I might see. My husband doesn't believe in the paranormal, but I don't know how else to explain what happened that night. What's your story? The old cottage. I've wanted to share this story for a while. In the late 80s, I moved into a 1-bedroom flat in a very old cottage. The cottage was split into 2, with another, medicated, couple living next door. It was also fully furnished with old furniture, which I now believe can add to the old vibes of a place. The cottage was over 100 years old, and it was rumored to be the first brothel in the city, and it sat right next to a very old graveyard. One night, I heard a gothic woman singing opera or something in this graveyard, and the voice carried so well and spookily, it sent shivers down my spine. Another time, while in the bath, I heard a horse and carriage go by, but I digress. The house always felt like it had a history, but it didn't feel evil or threatening. The first night I stayed there, I had a very unsettled sleep and dreamed there was a party in the living room with many people poking in their heads to see me asleep in the bedroom. But things only started to get intriguing when my girlfriend stayed over. She woke up, bolt upright in bed and scream at me that there was a man at the window screaming at us to get out because the house was on fire. I tried to get her to describe him. She just said he was old and day and white. She refused to stay over again. It was obviously real for her, but I just took it as a terrible dream. Things started to go missing, just cigarette lighters and coins that you would search everywhere for and then find in plain sight on the floor, where I had already checked. This happened with my house keys, so a friend and I got in his car, drove to my girlfriend's for the spare key, and drove home. Parking next to the cottage and getting out of the car, my friend saw a key appear in midair and drop to the pavement. I heard the tinkle. He was spooked. Not long after, I had friends around and was in the lounge when, in a split few seconds, I saw a woman walk past my hallway in a distinctive flower-patterned dress. Running into the lounge, I had 2 friends around, and they were both wearing jeans. One of my friends invited a person who I would describe as a white witch. She owned a crystal shop. This lady came round and performed a ceremony where we sat together on the floor with crystals and candles. Invoking angels, she invited whoever was in the house to come forward and step into the light. At that moment I swear I saw a bright glow and flash, and then in front of us, all these coins and lighters appeared on the carpet. This lady explained it was a small boy who was trapped but had now gone to the light. This never explained the woman in the flower dress. The lady and I went around and planted crystals and herbs on the corners of the property. She explained that this would heal the land. Not long after, I moved out. While moving a chest of drawers, a photo fell down from behind. It was a picture of a middle-aged lady standing in my garden wearing the same dress. Now I was spooked. Funny enough, straight after I moved out, the house was done up, and then, strangely, it was bulldozed. Now sitting on the same spot as a garden sanctuary. The council even diverted some of a creek to flow in it. There are carvings and everything. Whatever that white witch did, it worked. Caught something watching me sleep. The incident happened in late June. I was in bed but not getting any rest. I was tossing and turning and basically couldn't fall asleep. When I do sleep, I sleep like a rock, but when I don't, I am very restless. Anyways, I had this odd feeling that night and kept hearing bizarre noises in my house, so I was pretty much just lying in bed trying to fall asleep without much luck. I finally closed my eyes and probably slept for about 5 minutes. It was about 3 a.m. At that time, I had a gut feeling that someone was watching me sleep. I don't understand why this feeling popped into my head, but it did. I sprang up as fast as I could, and it almost seemed like I jolted out of bed to an upright position and saw something just as I suspected watching me sleep. This completely blew my mind, as I have never seen anything like this before and can barely describe it, but here goes. The figure was about 7 to 8 feet tall, resembling a human but taller and wider, and it was entirely composed of blue and white light. It almost resembled flames or similar substances, such as gas or particles. It had no distinct facial features at all. It was just a figure made of this light, almost illuminated from within but didn't create light surrounding it. It was very bizarre. As I jumped up in my bed, I got a good look at it for about 2 to 3 seconds before it jolted out of my bedroom, as I saw it do. Also, when I jumped out of bed, My boyfriend was sleeping next to me, and I yelled, "He's watching us sleep." He didn't immediately wake up, and of course the figure was out of the room when he did. I was very alarmed after that, but at the same time, I had this feeling that it was okay. I consider myself a very logical and practical person and cannot figure out what this being was or why it was watching me sleep. I was wide awake when I saw this, so please don't say it was sleep paralysis. This is where things get a little more intriguing. I know this will seem far-fetched, but I am telling the truth in hopes someone may be able to help. After seeing this being, I have been able to predict things in my immediate future with 100% accuracy. For example, I was at my mother's house for the 4th of July, and we were getting ready to leave her house and go home for the evening. As we were saying our goodbyes, myself, my boyfriend, and our 2-year-old daughter, a scene of a car crash instantly popped into my head, and I told myself, "We will get hit tonight." It came from nowhere, and I brushed it off as me being paranoid. As luck would have it, we got hit on the freeway from behind in a rainstorm driving home. We were all okay, but the fact that I predicted this and it actually happened really frightened me. Since then, I have accurately foreseen other events, such as another car crash in which we also suffered a rear-end hit. Since the sighting, I have not been able to sleep very soundly. I can hear things very clearly now, even the smallest, faintest noises. I really hope to see this thing again, as I am very intrigued by what the hell this was and what the heck happened to me while I was sleeping. My Payne Road story, Rural Hall, North Carolina. I went down to the Payne Road property with some friends, maybe 7 years ago, high on mescaline. It was about 1 a.m. when we all started our trek. The trail is actually a road, but we were going to the property itself, which is down a long, closed trail behind the cemetery. At first, we hung at the cemetery for a moment, checking out headstones and pondering the lives of those who lie there. As we stood there, a car started approaching around the bend. It approached very slowly. It crawled to a stop in front of the cemetery. And it just sat there. We looked for a moment, and it didn't seem like it was leaving. I identified it as an old 59 T-Bird. One of my sober friends went to see what they wanted, and as he got close to the vehicle, it started rolling away. It rolled up the hill and around the curve ahead. What was weird is that it didn't make a single sound. No engine. No tread on asphalt. Nothing. It made my hair stand on end, but I didn't waver. We decided to begin our trek, trying to laugh off the spooky encounter we just had. It was a cool, cloudy night, and the moon rarely illuminated our path. Because we're smart people, our only lights were phones when it got too dark. The mescaline was playing tricks on my eyes, and I kept on seeing shadowy motion just beyond the tree line. Trying not to freak out my friends, I said nothing. As we walked along, we noticed a light casting our shadows forward, as if a car was approaching from a distance. However, this trail was inaccessible by car. When we turned around to look, there was nothing, and our shadows were no longer visible. We arrived at the property line after around 30 minutes. It was eerily quiet for how wooded it was. You'd expect the sound of insects, but perhaps it was too cold. The house was burned down due to vandalism in 1991, but the foundation and stairs still stood. We sat on the concrete staircase and smoked and discussed what those of us who were high saw and felt. One of my friends got really spooked when I discussed the shadowy figures in the tree line, saying he saw the same thing. We sat for a little while longer and decided to make the trek back to the car. As we began to leave the property, a sound threw my friend into complete shock. The sound of a door opening. But there was no door. There was no house. He was completely immobilized, and we were all super freaked out. I and another friend had to take him under the arms and physically walk him down the trail until he got a grip, all the while I saw more and more shadowy movements in the tree line, feverishly listening for movements that weren't our own. Once we were off the trail and the car was in sight, it felt like a weight had been lifted. My buddy wasn't right afterwards, and he obsessed over that night for months, spiraled into alcoholism, and died of a heroin overdose a couple of years later. Maybe not everyone is suited to go on spooky hallucinogenic journeys. Know your psychological limits. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I was at a family gathering at my great-grandmother's house. There were all of the kids, about 5 of us in total, ranging from age 5 to 12. We were all outside playing in the backyard, and we decided to go check out this old abandoned house that was a short walk from her property. We had asked about the house before, and my family advised us that the house had been vacant for at least 30 years. They also told us we could go up there and walk around the house if we wanted to, but only to be extra careful because they knew the condition of the house was very poor. We get up to the house and decide to go in the back door, because the front entrance to the house had wooden stairs that were obviously no longer stable enough to support us. We walk into the house, and it appears completely empty. No furniture or carpet, just an unfinished bare floor. The floor was rotting away in some areas, and vegetation was beginning to grow through the house. We walk into the living area, and there is a fireplace with a very fresh-looking piece of plywood fastened to the fireplace. All 5 of us swore that we could hear a knocking sound coming from the fireplace, but we quickly dismissed it, as it could have been a squirrel or small animal that got in there. This fireplace had one of the old-style chimneys without the metal mesh blocker at the top. We didn't think much of it and continued to explore the house. This is where things begin to get weird. We walk into one of the bathrooms, and it is pristine. As in, clean, fresh towels on the towel rack, a fresh bar of soap on the sink, no dust, a clean mirror, and a clean toilet with water in it. Mind you, nobody has lived in this home for at least 30 years, and the rest of the house is literally rotting away. The bathtub has a fresh bar of soap sitting on it, and there is a mat in it as well as a very small window in the bathroom. We all had an extremely uneasy feeling in this bathroom, and I'm getting chills typing this. The temperature in the bathroom felt at least 30 degrees cooler than the rest of the house, and it just felt like we weren't supposed to be in there. That is when we decided to bail. We all ran outside of the house, and we looked back towards the house, and all 5 of us saw the silhouette of an elderly woman staring out of that bathroom window. We all screamed simultaneously and ran back to my grandmother's house in terror. I have been wanting to revisit this place since I have gotten older to see if anything would happen, but the house has since been torn down and a new house built on the property with people living there. Haunted House, Denville, New Jersey. This is a tale from my parents, a true story directly from my father. The setting is about 1980, in northern NJ, I believe the neighborhood was Denville. My dad was an immigrant, having come over to live in the US, along with most of his family. He was the second youngest of 12 children. His oldest sibling was a well-established businessman that was literally a millionaire. My dad basically became a caretaker to my brother for his lavish lifestyle. The brother owned $1 million house that belonged to a former doctor, having multiple new cars such as Buicks, Oldsmobiles, and Eagles. He was a model family with a wife and 2 adopted kids, even owning a dog. The guy wasn't great, though. My dad would always have to fill gas for his cars, feed his dog, and do things that his brother should have been doing. Instead, said brother was out socializing, leaving his house empty most of the time. With that, my dad was at the house most of the time. A lot. A few times he had spent the night as well. Emphasis on few. Because stuff got weird when he did. One particular time the brother's father-in-law was at the house along with my dad. They were just there at the house with the brother's wife. I don't know if they had their kids then, it's not clear to me. There was a guest room, and the father-in-law stayed there, with my dad on the couch. Dad could not sleep. He was restless and barely got any sleep. However, the next morning, the father-in-law came up to him. I don't know about you, but I won't be staying at this house again. And true to his word, he never did. Another time my dad was doing some work in the yard and cleaning up their basement. They had a den along with a fireplace. He had just done a ton of work and decided to take a nap on the basement floor for a few. He described that he had a surreal dream, that he could see what was going on in the room at the current time despite him sleeping. Just at that point, this gnarled figure emerged from the fireplace down the chimney, laughing at him. He described it as looking like Rumplestiltskin. He woke up with a start but didn't see anything. It was afterwards that he had stopped sleeping at the house. Dad also remarked that his brother had a medium, a clairvoyant, as a friend that would visit the family regularly. One odd thing he mentioned was that the medium had said she made a friend for the brother's daughter. And frequently the girl would stand facing a wall corner, whispering or talking as if she were conversing. Along that same vein, my dad's sister related an experience at the same house. She had stopped over for lunch and was sitting with a clairvoyant at the dining table. All of a sudden a chandelier over the table started to swing wildly side to side. The sister was alarmed at this, just staring at the swinging chandelier, as there was no possible way for it to be doing that. The clairvoyant looked up at the chandelier and then back at sister. "Oh, don't worry about that. That's just some of my friends." That's the extent of the stories from that house. The brother ran into money problems and had to move, leaving the house an unspecified amount of time later. It was short, a few years, I believe. They're not much to think of, but the story with my dad seeing the being coming down the chimney has left its mark. Every single time he tells it, his eyes turn wide. You literally see the hair stand up on his arms. It scares you yourself seeing him tell the story. You know something was going on at that house, probably a lot more than what was mentioned. Thanks for listening. A voice in the dark. This happened when I was around 5 or 6. I remember it vividly, and it happened shortly after the first dream that I still remember having. But based on what happened in it, it very well could have been sleep paralysis. So, a while later, I wake up one night. My door is open, and my lamp is on, just like always. It didn't take me very long to figure out why I'd suddenly woken up. I can hear someone downstairs, speaking very loudly. They were saying 10, 10, 10 over and over again. It sounded like a boy I knew around that time, whom I quite liked. For a moment, I stayed still. Eventually, a mixture of curiosity and fear got the best of me, and I walked into the dark upstairs hallway. My parents' bedroom was just down the hall, and my brother's was directly across from where I was standing in front of mine. I walked over to the banister in front of the stairs after turning on the light that was in the staircase. I leaned over, trying to see if I could see into the family room, where the voice was. I couldn't. Now, being older, I know that there is literally no way for me to see it from there. Anyways, I waited for a moment before going into my parents' bedroom and jumping into their bed. My brother was already in there, so I just went to the bottom of the bed. I didn't mind, I just needed to not be alone. I fell asleep to the voice still going. I was terrified and used a pillow to try and cover my ears. Later on, when my dad was getting ready for work, we all woke up. He asked what was wrong, and I told him and my mom what had happened. My mom said it must have just been her calling my dad's name, as his name is Ben. But I knew that wasn't the case for 3 distinct reasons. The first, and most compelling, was that I saw her. She was asleep, her mouth was not moving at all. The second being that I had distinctly heard it coming from the family room. The last was that, to me, Ben doesn't sound like 10. Neither does Ren, nor Ken, nor any other names. I knew what I had heard. They tried to tell me that it was just a dream. I, of course, tried to convince them that that wasn't true. How would they explain me being in their bed? The light being on? I didn't know what I had heard. The only thing down there was a counting train toy that we had, as my brother is 2 years younger than me and still plays with those things. Sometimes, I also played with them because I found them fun, though I'm not sure why. But that still doesn't explain why it was stuck repeating the number 10 for who knows how long in the middle of the night. As a child, I asked around a lot to see if someone knew what was going on. No one did. I was left feeling like an idiot, like I was crazy. I know I can't prove what happened, and I hope it wasn't just my imagination or a reaction to my brother's illness. If anyone knows what this could have been, or if there's something I should do, please feel free to share. This also isn't the only experience I've had in this house, and I may share more later on. Thanks for listening. A huge creature watched me for minutes, and I didn't even realize. So this happened to me in July of this year. Just to give context of where I was to discount any of the possible wildlife explanations. At that time, I lived in a suburban area of the Midwest that was quite populated and located near a major city. There was nowhere that could be considered rural within at least a 40-mile radius. So anyways, to start my experience, it was late at night, and I was hanging out with my golden retriever, Leo, who was just turning a year old in a couple weeks at the time. I was just watching videos in my room while he lay on the floor next to me. It was about 12:30 a.m., and I was ready for bed, so I had to take him out before we both went to sleep. So I got him on his leash, and we went outside. My family and I lived in a large apartment complex. The apartments have quite a few rooms and their own personal garage but still have 8 to 10 apartments per building. So the buildings are very long and slim. Behind our building is a long strip of grass that goes out about 15 feet, then a large tree line that is 20 feet deep and about 200 feet long. Leo and I go out the front, around the building, to the back. As we don't have an exit to the back, we are on the second floor, and we all have our own separate entrances. We make it back to the grassy area, and I walk out in the grass with him to let him do his business. I am on my phone, not really paying attention, and we stand there for a good minute. I realize it's been a good amount of time and notice Leo hasn't moved one bit. I turn off my phone and look to him and realize he hadn't moved from the spot we stopped at and was looking at the other building right by the woods. He had been frozen the whole time. I pet him, and he looked up at me, and when I stopped petting him, he looked straight back at the same spot. I hadn't at the time realized he was looking at that spot that whole time until then and looked over to where he was looking at. My eyes were not adjusted to the darkness, and I could only see the shadow of the building. The only source of light was streetlights about 50 feet behind us. I looked back at him and quietly chuckled because I thought he just heard a squirrel and was all perked up. It was very cute, and I then looked back at my phone. Leo in the corner of my eye, about 15 seconds later, flinched back as if he had been startled by something and started to whine. I looked over at the spot this time, realizing now he was scared of something he saw while we had been out there. My eyes were now adjusted to the dark. I saw what he was fixated on now. In the shadow of the building right next to the corner of the wall in front of the tree line, about 15 feet away from me, was that creature. I could only see a black outline, as it was not lit up enough, but it was massive. I know how tall the building was relative to me. When I was standing right next to the building, it was about 5 feet tall. That wouldn't be very tall if it were standing upright, but this thing was on all fours. The best way I can describe how it looked is when a bulldog snarls and kind of flexes its front legs when trying to intimidate something, but it was scaled up to be 5 feet tall and had more muscle. Its outline was much wider. There is no way that this was any creature in the Midwest. The only creature that is remotely close to that is a black bear. That's only way up north, nowhere near where I am in the southeastern part of my state. There are no wooded areas for a bear to live in anyways, as stated in the beginning. Plus, the maximum height a black bear can be on all fours is 3 feet, which is not very broad. This thing surpassed that by a long shot and was very broad. I jumped back in fear and was just frozen after that for a solid 30 seconds, just staring at it. I then backed away slowly, keeping my eye on it the whole time. Leo then began to growl and snarl at it, and we rounded the corner. Leo has never acted aggressive like that ever before, so this just made me even more terrified. I then peeked around the corner no more than a second later, and it was gone. No noise, no shadow swiftly moving behind the building. Just gone. There's no way something could have moved behind the building that fast without a sound, especially of that size. This freaked me out even more, and I sprinted back inside to the house. I would really like to think that I was hallucinating this and was just tired, but it was clear as day, even during the night. I have never told anyone this story before, and it freaks me out to this day. Has anyone ever experienced anything similar?
I, a 21-year-old female, was about 11 years old when I went through this.
When I was in, I believe, the 4th grade, I think I may have had a spirit attached to me. This was around the time of the Charlie Challenge, amongst many other paranormal trends. Although I didn't participate in them, I did find them really interesting. I was never scared of these types of things. But to get to the point, I started to see a little girl in the corner of my eye a lot. She started off far away, and I tried to ignore it. Sometimes when I turned to look, I could see her for a split second. She never moved and was always still. She would either look at me or look straight, depending on how she was sitting. She was pale, had dark hair, and looked soulless. Over time, I started to fear her, as I kept seeing her, and she would get closer as months went on. It got to a point where one morning I was getting ready for school, and when I closed the closet door, she was standing behind it, and she and I were face to face. I remember freezing in fear, and then I looked away, and when I opened my eyes, she was gone, and my mom walked into the room. The stress from it eventually got so bad I told my grandma, and she told me to tell the spirit to leave, and I started doing that. She eventually started to move further away from me until the last time I saw her. The last time I saw her, I was downstairs in the dark going to get a bottle of water, and as I was going up the stairs, I saw her, and it seemed like she was trying to run at me, and I yelled to leave me alone, and that was the last time I saw her. It was also the only time I saw her physically move. After that experience, I remember feeling relieved, and it just stopped. I've never had anything even remotely like that happen to me again. Can anyone tell me what I may have experienced or if anyone else has experienced anything similar? I would like to add I never had any kind of imaginary friends growing up, and I was always content playing by myself. I never experimented with any rituals, I just watched a lot of paranormal stuff but was never scared of it. Terrifying experiences in my neighborhood for me and some friends. So, to begin this, I'd like to say that some of what I've seen could be attributed to my anxiety attacks, during which I frequently experience both auditory and visual hallucinations. I discovered both of these aspects after my experiences, and while it's possible that some could be attributed to my anxiety attacks, for all intents and purposes, everything I describe here is based on either my observations or accounts from multiple eyewitnesses. I will organize this information based on the types of humanoids encountered. Shadow people. Shadow people are a phenomenon that many people witness, whether they are tricks of the light, shadowy spots mistaken for darkness, or something else. In my experience and those of others around me, these shadow people are not static. The most common shadow people I noticed were those that hide in plain sight, and once spotted, they would retreat, disappearing fully into thin air. I would notice them often walking around the neighborhood, and to be honest, they never really scared me. If they were just going to hide, who were they bothering? Perhaps I need to see, witness, and acknowledge them, but honestly, I don't care much and usually just move on. The next type of shadow person I'd witness was the black shadowy figure in the shape of a skinny, average height man running across the street faster than anyone should be reasonably expected to be able to. It's practically instant, and of course, perhaps it is explicable through something outside of hallucination, but until someone can tell me what it could be, I'll believe what I do. I do have an eyewitness for this incident. Someone I was walking with in my neighborhood around 10 at night saw the figure and pointed it out to me, and I confirmed that I had seen it too. This is, of course, why I mentioned that it could be explained outside of hallucinations, but again, I don't see how. Could a plane passing overhead have slightly blocked the moonlight? Not sure. Actual figures. Now, I have a few eyewitnesses for one and only one of these. The others are purely anecdotal and entirely explainable, yet they still were so off-putting that I had no choice but to put them here. The one I have eyewitnesses for, I was unfortunately not there at the time, but I questioned all of them independently and without telling them that I'd asked others, and they all said effectively the same thing. That there was some skinny, white, horrifying creature that crouched into the bushes next to my friend's window while it was open and just stared in. I may be able to provide picture proof of where it lay. It made a noticeable dent in both the bushes and front yard rocks, but it might be hard since he doesn't live there anymore, and getting that close without looking like a freak might be a bit on the tough side. Outside of that, I've witnessed what appeared to be something akin to the girl from The Ring, you know the one, I'm pretty sure there's some Japanese demon that's based on or something, where there's a girl with her hair covering her face. If anyone can give me the name of that, I'd appreciate it. I saw that from a distance. There was no one around her, and she was in the middle of the street, wearing what appeared to be a bridal dress. Another thing I witnessed that freaked me out was a girl who walked through a park until she reached a bench, then sat there, looking straight forward. Now, this on its own isn't very scary, but she did it for so long. She sat there for, 2 hours just looking. I didn't dare get close, but I could tell she was staring straight forward. There were kids at the park, so it wasn't the worst thing to potentially see, but it was awful. The park in reference is right next to the school, and once, while looking into the school, I saw a figure inside the school that looked exactly like me. The school was closed, but that one door was open. I freaked really ducking hard but, for whatever reason, didn't go home. Probably because I knew I'd have to pass that thing again. For anyone curious, I'm a 17-year-old guy, but most of my experiences happened when I was 15 to 16. People are scarier than anything paranormal. This is a true story of something I experienced. It must have been over a decade by now. I was a kid at the time that my dad had bought this quaint house on the outskirts of a little town. It was a decently sized home with a big backyard overlooking the marshes and unused farmers' fields, and the only entrance to it was either through the house or across the large fields. To put this in context, my bedroom was at the back of the house, facing the big backyard, when I lived with my dad. I remember one night very vividly, some 10 to 12 years later. I was sitting in my room, doing digital artwork on my computer. It was something I loved to do as a teenager, and usually I'd listen to music with headphones on. The way I was sitting had me facing semi-away from the big window in my room, the largest in the house. I had my blackout blinds drawn, and it was the only room in the entire house that had the light on, and I'd assume from outside you'd see slivers of light through the edges of the folding blinds. I think it was between 2:30 and 3 a.m. I was peacefully minding my own business when I heard a massive slam on my window. It was a dull but loud thud and what I thought was a shout. My dad was sleeping peacefully in the room next to me. How he didn't hear anything at the time still amazes me to this day. I remember just sitting there, shook, with no clue what I just heard, until it happened again. I heard it clearly. Somebody was outside my window. In the backyard. Whoever this was had no reason to be there. I remember being too scared to open my blinds. Instead, I got up, just staring at the window, not taking my eyes off it. Something I'm thankful for to this day is that I went with my gut feeling. My gut was telling me to grab a flashlight and check the front door. This was an old house, so I would have to leave the comfort of the house to enter the barn to get to the main entrance of the house. I remember shining my light through the glass in the door. The window had the frosted film for privacy, but sure enough, I barely got the flashlight lifted 3 to 4 inches to the glass before seeing the coat of whoever was out there. The real kicker? Absolute terror set in when I realized the door hadn't been locked this entire time. I managed to lock it and run inside, and the first thing I grabbed was a bread knife. Not practical, but when your adrenaline and fear are coursing through your brain, it's the last thing you think of. I remember trying to wake up my dad, who was passed out like a drunk sailor, to see whoever was outside. We never found the man, and he never came back. Had I not locked that door, prank or not, I dread to think what would have happened to me. I've seen some shit in my life, but people will forever scare me. My grandfather was born, raised, and buried in Appalachia. As in he had no electricity growing up, no plumbing, nothing. He was a really quiet, reserved guy and had a chronic case of old man syndrome. For example, he was the type of person who wore his steel-toe work boots to the beach during a family vacation. When I was very young, I once asked him if he had seen anything weird or spooky. He told me 2 stories. The first was that there was a door in the house where he grew up that just wouldn't stay shut. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with the frame or the lock or latch, it would just constantly open on its own. He said they literally chained it one night, padlock and all. When they woke up in the morning, the padlock was unlocked and the chain was on the floor. The door, of course, was wide open. The second story is a bit creepier. He said that when he was a boy, he and his friends liked playing ball on and around this one particular dirt road. When they'd hear someone coming up on their horse or anything, they'd just move to the side and let the rider go by. No problem, get back to playing. One day, they hear a horse coming up the road, so they move to the side and wait. But when the rider came into view, he claims that they were headless. I assume he and the other boys ran off into the surrounding property somewhere. The worst summer break I ever had. Okay, so before I begin my story, this is a true story that happened to me when I was in high school, and it also made me a believer in the paranormal. My story began just before summer break. I and my friend were planning what we should do during the break when my friend suggested I come with him to visit his dad. Since I had no other plans, I figured, why not? We were planning to stay there for 2 weeks. The first night, I and my friend were playing games on my friend's PS2 in the living room/kitchen. There was this portrait of my friend's cousin hanging on the wall next to the TV. It creeped me out because it was one of those where the eyes follow you. Anyways, after playing for 3 hours, we decided to sleep in the living room. While I was sleeping, I woke up around 2:45 a.m. It sounded like somebody was crumpling a piece of paper right up against my ear, but I could see there was nothing there. I was frozen in fear. It went on for 10 minutes. Suddenly, after it stopped, I heard footsteps walking around the couch I slept on. Thereafter, I heard loud thumping from the ceiling, like someone was stomping on the ceiling. Luckily, it stopped there. At some point, I fell asleep. I asked my friend the next day about the thumping. He told me it was just rats or mice, but I know there's no way that's true. The next night we slept in the bedroom. There are 2 beds in each corner of the room, one faces the door while the other does not, and there is a built-in wardrobe blocking the view. My friend insisted that I take the bed facing the door. That night I was lying in bed and watched the door handle slowly move like someone was trying to open the door, then suddenly it opened and the room got ice cold. Luckily, that's all that happened. The next night our power went out, and my friend's dad told us to make coffee. As I and my friend walked down the hallway, we heard somebody walking behind us, but when we turned to look, there was nobody there, and when we called out to his dad, he was on the other side of the house. Not long after, he told me that one night after he went to bed, he saw a shadow of an old lady standing next to his bed staring at him and walking off into the hallway and vanishing. He said that most likely the door of the bedroom and the thing I heard walking behind us was most likely that old lady. I asked if there was a way to avoid having that terrifying stuff happen. He told me to go to bed before anybody else, and it worked. Nothing else happened for the rest of the time I was there. But after I got back home, my friend told me he would rather not freak me out, but when we heard footsteps behind us, he turned around first and saw a tall shadow figure standing behind me. As a child, I lived at the end of a mile-long dirt road in the desert, located at the base of a mountain in Jerome, Arizona, which is known for being a ghost town. I would hear people calling me all the time. I would often wake up to someone screaming in my face while no one was there. I found a photo of me sleeping once on my phone. Scared me shitless. Things would move from where I left them. I had things thrown at me a few times when I was the only one home. I would see very clearly people walking through the hallway/people standing above my bed, but there was no one there. There would be scratching and knocking from inside the walls. And the time I saw my dad walk past my bedroom door, only to walk past it in the same direction less than 5 minutes later. The hallway is long and thin. I was in the living room once, and for some reason, I looked behind me, at the back door, which was glass, and saw someone watching me, but it wasn't a person. Their face appeared distorted and melted. It was the middle of the day, too. I'd periodically find scratches on my body when I woke up. I saw in a previous video someone referring to the way transparent being looks like a watery shadow. Imagine that, but in the shape and size of a grown man. I watched as this man thing walked through my yard and up the hill. I saw it very clearly and can still remember going, what the F? No one ever believes me when I tell them this, but I was sitting on my bed once and looked over at a pile of laundry and saw a little white creature standing on it. Like it was a tiny person with a big head and mouth, and it was pitch white. I went what the duck, and it opened its mouth and shrieked and disappeared into thin air. This story makes me feel insane, but I swear on my life it happened. I live with my boyfriend a whole town away now, but every time we have to go back to that town, I get so uneasy. But shit still happens at our house. Like, the time we were watching a movie in the bedroom and a piece of paper flew across the room. Even my dog saw it. And a few nights ago, we have sheer curtains, I saw two huge round eyes watching me at, like, 3 a.m. I only saw them because of the reflection off the TV. I still get the screaming in my face while I'm asleep sometimes, and the people calling my name. Not as often, though. Oh, and last night at work, I work at a fairly new Pizza Hut. The building is less than 10 years old, some crazy shit happened. One of our female cooks always gets made fun of because she's convinced the women's restroom is haunted. I never believed her, but So I went to clean the restroom last night, and as I opened the door, I heard a weird metallic noise, and the handicap stall door was swinging closed. I quickly ran back to the kitchen, where everyone else was laughing. But like half an hour later I had to pee, so I just sucked it up and decided to go use the bathroom. I had just locked the stall door and unbuttoned my pants when all of a sudden there was a loud slam on the stall door, like someone had Sparta kicked it. The whole partition shook from the impact. There is no way/space for anyone to hide in the bathroom. Also, when I was a toddler, my mom came into the bedroom because I was screaming bloody murder. She said she found me standing in my bed, screaming, and when she picked me up, I started talking in a voice that wasn't mine and chanting in Latin or whatever. I've never had an issue with sleepwalking that I know of. Oh. And typing all this made me remember something else that happened when I was probably 12-13. Katie, a woman with the same name as mine, used to babysit me. She was a hardcore practicing Wiccan and had a black cat named Sebastian. We were sitting in her backyard, which is covered by trees and bushes. We were sitting there, and I remember suddenly feeling really calm. And then I saw a bunch of little lights start floating around us, and Katie started talking to them, and she had a bowl of honey and fruit out for them. Terrifying blurry-faced boy that I've seen twice, any ideas what it could be? First sighting. I was maybe 11 years old. It was summer, so my brother, he was about 13, and I were home alone. It was approaching mid-morning, and I was still asleep when something suddenly woke me up. I raised my head and saw a boy that looked just like my brother, short dark hair, red shirt, clearly a young boy, standing in my doorframe. As soon as I spotted him, he darted away. His face was very blurry, but I have bad eyesight and obviously didn't have my glasses on because I had literally just woken up, so I kind of just grumbled to myself and got up. I went downstairs to hang out with my brother about an hour later and asked why he had woken me up, but he swore up and down that he had no idea what I was talking about. He is a notoriously terrible liar, his eyes sparkle mischievously when he lies, and terrified of anything paranormal, so I believed him and kind of just didn't know what to make of it. Second sighting. I was 21. I was at my workplace, a secular preschool located in the basement of a big old church. This location is not unusual for anyone familiar with New England. We were months and months into the school year, we had our routines, I was comfy with the building, and I knew the kids' personalities well. I was at the sink in the bathroom, down the hall and around a corner from the classroom, with 3 boys. One boy, we'll call him T, had finished washing his hands and was waiting up against the wall for the other 2 boys, W and G, to finish washing their hands. T was an incredibly sweet and innocent child, lacking any hint of slyness or mischievousness. He once burst into tears when another child joked that the amount of snow we'd gotten overnight was going to cover the whole school because, and I quote, while sobbing, "I love school and don't want it to go away." I was only able to watch T out of the corner of my eye because W and G, who were very playful and best friends, required most of my attention and frequent prompting to finish washing their hands. Out of the corner of my eye, I see T haul ass around the corner and back toward the classroom. His short blonde hair, his red shirt, and his blurry face, I assumed it looked that way because, he was moving at a high speed in my periphery, sprinting full tilt away from me. I call out after him and run up to the corner and look around it, couldn't go further because I needed to keep W plus G in my sight, knowing I should see him in the very long hallway, but the hall is empty. There's no way he could have gotten to the end of the hall and back into the classroom yet. I start panicking. I know I can't go looking for him until I get the other boys back in the classroom. So I run back into the washroom to grab them, but then T emerges from a toilet stall that was in the opposite direction from the one the blurry face ran. He's looking very shy and giggly, and he just quietly goes, "Ha, I tricked you." And then goes back to his spot against the wall. "You sure did, buddy. Got all the kids back to the classroom and was too busy to think much more about it after that. So yeah. I'm 24 years old now and haven't seen it since, but I wonder about it often. Does anyone know what this little dude could be? I've read theories about ghosts, like choosing not to show certain parts of themselves if they think the sight could be disturbing. There are also those Japanese no-face ghosts, Ike. It never felt scary or malicious. It was always just playful. It genuinely felt like a child's energy both times. I just worry about this little ghost boy. My friend saw something terrifying in our school washroom. This happened when I was in 10th standard. Our school was a convent, and it already had a creepy atmosphere. We were lazy in studies, so the school made us attend special classes from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. During that time, only the classrooms had lights on. The washrooms were dark and far from our class. Around 8 p.m., my friend Jolbin went to the washroom alone. Inside he saw a girl standing at the end of the bathroom. She was smiling and calling him. He collapsed right there and was taken to the hospital. Nobody believed his story, but he recovered even weeks after. He kept saying what he saw was real, and it still scares him even today. Sometimes I still think about that night. I heard from seniors and friends that the school was once an old cemetery. I don't know if it's true, but it makes me wonder. It was behind me. I'm sure of it. 100% true. A little background. At the time of the event, I was 17, way past the imagination age. My family and I are devoted Christians, so we don't necessarily believe in ghosts or spirits as being the remnant of the living, but instead we see them as demons taking the shape of the dead to instill even more fear. We also believe that although mental and physical disease is caused mainly by scientific things, at times demons can afflict people with the same diseases to weaken them and harm them, especially with things like depression. A few years prior to the event, my mother told me that when I was a baby, she had an encounter that scarred her for life. She said that one afternoon as she napped next to my crib, she woke up to a weird feeling she could not explain. When she opened her eyes, she saw what she describes as an older gentleman wearing all black that looked like he belonged in the early 1900s. She couldn't see his eyes well, all she could describe is that they looked sunken and black and that she could see his crooked smile. When she saw him, he smiled enormously and reached for me. When she tried to move, she realized she couldn't. She tried to call out to my dad, who she could hear was in the kitchen, but no voice would come out. Then the thing said to her, "Go ahead and scream all you want, no one can hear you. There's nothing you can do." I guess she must have passed out or something because that is all she can remember. I always thought it was BS. I have always had strange things happen since I was a little girl. These experiences have included unexplained weird feelings, strange dreams, and even near-death experiences. The week before. The week leading up to the event I was very depressed. I felt misunderstood and isolated. I had even considered ending my life, but I knew I was stronger than what I was feeling currently, so I pushed those feelings away. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and younger sister. My mom has the master bedroom, and my little sister got the other room. I slept in the living room, which wasn't such a bad thing since the way the living room was set up made it possible for me to create a room of my own with a room divider. I often found myself alone in the apartment due to our scattered work schedules. That week I started to feel very uneasy when I was by myself. I would hear things that I couldn't explain rationally, and I would see things out of the corner of my eyes, but after a closer look there would be nothing there. I tried to explain it away in my head, but I now know I wasn't going insane. I kept thinking a lot about the story my mom had told me. That night I was lying on my couch, and as always it was freezing, so I had a bunch of blankets on, so many that they spilled onto the floor off of the couch. I was trying to get some shut-eye when I started to feel very fearful. My heart started to beat really fast. I can't really explain exactly what I was feeling, but it was just a feeling of sadness, of dread, I don't know. I was turned toward the wall, with my back toward the cliff of the couch. As I lay there, I heard someone call my name. I thought it was my mom who had arrived from work, so I called back, "What?" But there was no answer. Then I heard my name again. There was no reply. I thought I had just imagined it since I realized I hadn't heard any doors open, so it couldn't possibly be my mom or my sister. That meant I was by myself, so I just lay there trying to ignore what had just happened. The entire living room floor was carpeted, so I felt real terror when I started to hear footsteps on the carpet coming from the hallway towards me. The closer the footsteps got, the more fear I felt. There was no other sound, just the sound of the carpet crunching as it got closer. I would rather not turn around. The steps reached right behind me, and that's when I felt the blankets by my feet tense up like someone was stepping on them. I have never experienced so much fear. I had a nightlight, and I could see a shadow on the wall I was facing. I don't know what came over me, but I gathered the courage and spun around to find my corner of the living room to be empty. No one there but me. Safe to say I did not sleep that night. I'm sure there are many ways that this could be explained, but I am convinced that whatever my mother saw so many years ago was behind me that night. I know this story might not be super scary because I didn't see anything or I wasn't harmed in any way, but for those who have had similar experiences, I know you agree when I say I'm glad I didn't see anything. I was petrified. The little girl in my mother's bedroom. My wife has always found it strange that I love supernatural horror movies. She says that I wouldn't feel that way if I'd experienced things that she has. I always teased her about her hidden ability to see stuff until an incident a few years ago that completely changed my outlook on life. We were at my mom's house hanging out downstairs when my wife decided to go upstairs for something. When she came back down, I could instantly tell that something terrifying had happened because she was breathing hard and she had tears in her eyes, but she was trying hard to hide it. She didn't say anything until later that night when we were alone. She told me that she had gone upstairs to get her phone from the bedroom, and when she was about to come downstairs, she could see into my mother's room, and she saw a little girl clear as day. My eyes are welling up, and I have goosebumps telling this. She said it was a little girl that looked to be about 7 or 8, but she said what really struck her was the fact that the little girl looked surprised and confused that she could see her. She stopped at the stairs, and they stared at each other for a good 15 seconds. She didn't bring it up to my mom or my sister, who was 12 and downstairs with me, because she would rather not scare them, knowing that they had to live here. The next day, I convinced her to tell my mom what happened, against her better judgment. I know my wife, and she's not the type to make things up, so I wanted her to get it out for better or worse. So anyway, she starts telling my mom what happened, and as she was describing the little girl she saw, my mom completely froze for a few seconds and then started crying hysterically. After a while she said, "That's my sister, name." My mom was 10 when her 8-year-old sister drowned. There are no pictures of her, and this was my wife's first time learning about the tragedy. Needless to say, this shook us all up for a while, and I no longer mess around or joke about anyone who says they have experienced or seen things. To add info on the tragedy, to offer some more details on the tragedy, she had gone to the beach with the neighbors, who fished, and some other people from the neighborhood. I know it sounds weird, but we're talking about the 70s, so it wasn't out of the norm there and then. Anyway, the story goes, she got into a fight with an older neighbor boy, who was 12 at the time, about a crab. When it was time to leave a couple of hours later and they couldn't find her, they started questioning him, and he pointed to where he last saw her. Her body was found in that exact spot. My mom is convinced to this day that that little boy ended her sister. She was the same age as him and says he was always very evil. She thinks that the neighbors covered up his involvement because they were related to the little boy. Also, she couldn't go to the beach that day for whatever reason, and as a protective older sister, she believes it would have never happened had she gone. She still beats herself up over it. Something else that happened to me as a kid that I couldn't explain, but my wife made the connection after I told her. When I was little, up till around 8 or 9, I used to regularly wake up to someone strangling me. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't breathe or move a muscle or scream no matter how hard I tried. It usually lasted around 20 seconds. The strange thing was that it only happened when I was alone, never ever when someone else was in the room. My wife pointed out that it was probably her trying to tell me what happened. She thinks the 12-year-old boy strangled her and held her under the water. I had never made that connection, but true or not, it really had a profound impact on me. I'm tearing up writing this. I don't know for certain if it's all related, to be honest, but the way this all came full circle for me was devastating. I now believe my mom that he ended her. This tragedy happened in 1974. 100-year-old haunted house. So for a bit of context, I am a 19-year-old female, and during my senior year of high school, I was living with my aunt to finish out my last 3 weeks of high school, as I was graduating early. The people living in the house were my aunt, her husband, my cousin H, an 11-year-old girl, and me. For some background, we lived in a very rural area, and the house was from the era when slavery was still in place and had 2 stories. There was the main staircase up to my aunt's and uncle's room and the one I and my cousin shared, as well as a balcony that was in between. Then there was a secondary staircase up to the original servants' quarters, an area that was under construction, as it was completely separated from the rest of the house, with only that staircase as an entrance and exit. There's no way to access the rest of the second floor from that area, as well as the attic, which is only accessible from the servants' quarters. I was home alone under quarantine due to COVID, as my father had contracted the virus, while my cousin, aunt, and uncle were 2 hours away picking up my other cousin and her husband from the airport. My cousin had pestered me multiple times with stories about the two sisters who owned the home back when it was a plantation and swore up and down that the house was haunted. Being several years older than her, I always brushed it off as her imagination and there being no truth behind the bizarre stories, but that day I started to question whether or not they were true. It was the early afternoon, around 3 p.m., and it was still light out, and I had my laptop in my lap, drawing and listening to music as I did homework. Since I was home alone, I decided to turn up the volume on my headphones, which made the music sound like it was coming from a speaker when I took them off, as I would have disturbed my cousin if she had been home. This was normal for me to do when no one was around, and this wasn't the first time I had been alone at the house. This day was different, however, because out of nowhere I heard a loud thud coming from above me, and it had to have been really loud if I could hear it over the music blaring in my headphones. I took off said headphones and looked up at the ceiling, thinking maybe there was a squirrel or something up there, which wasn't uncommon. When I heard nothing after a while, I put my headphones back on, only to hear the same loud thud a few minutes later. I again took off my headphones and got up, waiting as still as possible to hear if the thud happened. It did. Only this time it came from outside the room, as if it were on the balcony. Of course I knew that couldn't be true since the entrance to the balcony was sealed and hadn't been used in years because the balcony itself was unstable and needed to be redone. So the creature couldn't be a person. I decided to leave the room and look out the window of the door to the balcony, only to see nothing. No squirrel, no person, nothing. About now I was getting annoyed. Whatever was making the noises was disrupting my concentration, and I needed to finish my homework. I went back to the bedroom and sat down, trying once again to concentrate and finish my work. As soon as I sat down, a thud came from the other side of my cousin's closet, where the original servants' quarters are located. Which is sealed. A solid wall. There was no way to access it unless I went all the way downstairs and up the stairs in the kitchen. Thinking this meant my family was home and my aunt was showing my other cousin the area that would be her and her family's room, I decided, fine, I'll take a break and go say hi. Only when I got downstairs and looked outside was there no car. I was still the only one home. So against all the instincts I just had to bolt outside. I opened the door to the stairway leading to the sealed area of the house. I went upstairs, and when I finally entered the completely cleared out, empty space, I initially saw absolutely nothing. There aren't any windows on this side of the house, and so I tried to flip on the lights to no avail. So I turned on my phone's flashlight only to have the daylight scared out of me. Walking around in a completely perfect circle in the center of the room was a woman. Thin and tall with dark, stringy hair and a tattered dress. As soon as the light hit her, she stopped, and I could hear her neck crack as she turned her head suddenly to look at me. I bolted down the stairs, my feet touching maybe 3 or 4 of the entire flight, slamming the door to the staircase and locking it from the outside, which is the only way to do so. I heard slamming against the door and bolted to the bathroom through the kitchen, slamming the door behind me, locking it, and curling up in the tub, keeping the curtain closed as I tried to call my aunt, terrified. She never picked up. I stayed in the tub until my family got home and waited until I heard them calling for me before I even peeked out the curtain and got out to greet them. I explained what happened, and my aunt's response was, "Oh, you met Maggie? Don't mind her, it's best to ignore her. She won't hurt you, she just likes to try and scare people." To this day I've never seen Maggie again, and I won't stay the night in their house anymore. They have since set up the servants' quarters for my other cousin and her family and removed the wall between H's closet and the servants' quarters so that the top floor is connected. Haunted house delivery, the girl who vanished, true scary story. It is said that there is a man who works at night in late times, when he used to deliver goods. One day, while he was going to a specific place at night, he encountered a strange girl in the street, and it was raining heavily, so she asked him to drive her to her house somewhere. Then he drove the girl to that place, and the girl entered, and it was very dark. Then the man continued on his way, realizing he had forgotten his coat with the girl. He thought to himself, "It is late, and I should not disturb her family, so I will return tomorrow." The man returned the next day to the house, knocked on the door, and when an old woman opened it, he explained what had happened the previous night. The old woman replied that she lived alone and had not seen any girl enter late at night. The man marveled and then paid attention to the picture on the wall and shouted very loudly that this girl who drove her is the one in the picture hanging on the wall. The old woman was surprised and told him, "I am sorry, but I live alone, and this is my granddaughter, who died 5 years ago." The man returned home feeling sad about losing his phone and money. The next day, he and his friends gathered at a cafe, where he recounted what had happened to him and specified the location of the house. A friend of his was surprised and said with great wonder that the people of the house died 3 years ago and that house is haunted. That man was terrified and nailed in place without any movement or a word. This is why you should never go to a cemetery during Halloween. Long-time lurker, first time sharing here, and I thought since spooky season is upon us, I would share my story with you all. This happened back in 2016. I was 17 at the time and was going through a rebellious phase. I grew up in Staffordshire, England, and lived in a very strict Catholic household. My parents were the sort who believed Halloween was blasphemous. Growing up, I never went trick-or-treating, carved a pumpkin, or dressed up. Every Halloween I would watch out of the window at all the other kids with their parents in their costumes and bags of sweets. Truthfully, I hated my parents, and I hated their rules and the constant judgment, and I felt trapped. That year, though, everything changed. I had just started seeing my then boyfriend James, now husband, who was 18. He came from the opposite kind of home. One of 4 kids, with loving, supportive parents. However, he'd fallen in with the wrong crowd at college, partied too much, and made bad decisions. But compared to me, he felt free. And when we got together, it felt like 2 lost souls finding each other. So on to the story. One of James' friends invited us to his Halloween party, which was roughly a 40-minute drive. Neither James nor I could drive at the time, so we asked his older brother Nate if he wanted to go. He reluctantly agreed and basically said he'll go on the condition he won't be expected to wear a costume and that we would also pay for fuel. We gratefully accepted. So Halloween came and we set off for the party. James and I were dressed as a corpse bride and groom. Cute. Nate wore a black hoodie and jeans. However, although he didn't want to dress up, he also didn't want to be left out, so he did buy a scream mask. When we arrived, the party was already in full swing. Kids in all kinds of costumes, music blasting, cheap alcohol everywhere. Not only was this my first party, it was also my first taste of Halloween, and James knew this. He has mentioned previously that Halloween was his favorite holiday, and when he found out I'd never celebrated it, he swore that this year would be my first real Halloween. We drank too much, of course. Everything was hazy but exciting. At some point, a group of people decided it would be funny to head to the old cemetery down the road. James and I wanted to go, and we asked Nate to come along, but he'd met a girl at the party and said he wanted to stay but to call him if we needed anything. The group set off, but it didn't last. One couple turned back when the girlfriend got sick, and the rest eventually bailed when they found a pub still open. That left just James and me, too drunk and stubborn to admit we should go back. We decided we'd check out the cemetery ourselves. The walk there felt surreal. The streets were basically empty, and if not for the odd street lamp and the torches on our phones, it was pitch black down the country lanes, and it was freezing, although due to the alcohol, this didn't really bother us. When we reached the gates, my stomach flipped. It was the kind of place you'd cross the road to avoid even in daylight. The gates were locked, so we walked along the edge into the surrounding woodland and managed to climb in over a broken piece of fence. We took a gloomy stroll among the gravestones, laughing and messing about. Eventually, we settled under a huge tree that backed onto the woods beside the cemetery. James pulled out his phone, downloaded some fake paranormal app, and started joking about making contact with the dead. I laughed and told him to put it away. We sat there for a while talking and smoking. There was something peaceful about the silent stillness of the cemetery. We started kissing. Disrespectful? I know, but we were drunk, dumb kids at the time. Then he froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I hadn't. I thought he was messing with me. But his face was deadly serious. I was about to roll my eyes when I heard it. A faint sound, almost like footsteps circling us. My stomach dropped. We both stood up, scanning the dark. That's when we saw it. A figure, a shadow standing a few feet ahead, darker than the night around it. It wasn't moving, but it was there. Neither of us moved. After a few moments passed, I then felt it. Something brushing against my arm, like fingers grazing my skin. I screamed and grabbed James, but there was nothing there. And when we spun back around, the shadow was gone. For one terrifying moment, everything was silent. And then, right by us, came a deep, guttural growl. Loud. Aggressive. Inhuman. We bolted. Hand in hand, stumbling over graves. As I attempted to climb over the fence, the bottom of my dress got caught and ripped. I went to grab the ripped fabric from off the fence when something snatched it. James and I watched in horror as part of my dress appeared to float up, hovering in front of us. Suddenly, the object slammed down to the ground with aggression and force. I screamed, and we ran, not looking back. Like a miracle, as soon as we ran back out onto the road, we saw Nate getting out of his car. He'd come looking for us after everyone else had already returned. "You both look like you've seen a ghost." James let out an awkward laugh, and with relief we piled into his car, still shaking, barely able to explain what happened. As we drove away, I started to calm down. I thought maybe it was just the alcohol, the power of suggestion, or maybe we'd imagined it. James, who was in the front seat, turned around and smiled at me. At this point, whatever it was or whatever we think we saw was enough to completely sober us up. But without warning, the car then screeched to a very sudden halt. Something had run across the road. Nate swore he'd seen something, but when we looked, nothing was there. James and Nate got out of the car to have a look, and that's when I turned to glance out the back window. And saw it. A handprint. Pressed against the glass from the outside. I screamed. James and Nate rushed back into the car, and there in my boyfriend's hand was the piece of fabric that had, not 5 minutes before, just ripped off of my dress while coming out of the cemetery. We both started to freak out and told Nate to step on it. We didn't stop until we were back in town. We ended up keeping the torn fabric from my dress, and we later tried to explain to Nate what had actually happened. He didn't believe us, and to this day, he still believes we were trying to play a prank on him. I know it's hard to believe, so we've pretty much kept it to ourselves all these years until recently. Cut to the present day, we got married in 2019, I am no longer on speaking terms with my parents, and last year we moved down south. This morning we were going through some of our unpacked storage boxes from when we moved, and my husband found the piece of fabric from my dress that we had stored away, and he figured it was time to tell our story. We love Halloween, and if anything, our experience made us appreciate the paranormal realm. Whether what we experienced was demonic or simply a spirit angry at two foolish teenagers remains a mystery. One thing is for sure, never go to a cemetery during Halloween. Trail of Tears. So ever since I was little, I have seen things. My mother had me at a very young age, so I spent most of my early childhood living with my grandmother and great aunt after my grandfather died, and they always tell me that when I was a kid I would never go into the kitchen because I would see a bloody man, and that I would also have tea parties in the corner with people, but those people never seemed to bother me. It wasn't until years later that I found out that someone in my family had been hurted as a child and left their small town where this guy still lived, but came back one day to discover that he was still hurting others, so he and a few others from the town that had also had this done to them decided that they were going to end this guy, and they stashed the knife they used in a box that apparently was in that house I grew up in, the bloody man, I think. As I've gotten older, various other things have happened to me, and I've seen things that I wish I didn't. But nothing was quite as crazy as when my family decided to move to a house in Mustang, Oklahoma, where our back gate lined right up with the Trail of Tears. At first nothing happened in the house, it was pretty normal when we first moved in. The only strange occurrence was when my mom attempted to hang her Jesus and Mary picture. It unexpectedly folded like cardboard and flew off our mantle instead of simply falling. We shrugged it off and moved on. Then one day my mom saw my sister looking really distressed. She was probably 4 at the time. My mom asked her what was wrong, and she told my mom that the man in the closet was telling her to do bad things and to hurt us. My mom immediately believed her because crazy shit happens to our whole family, and my mom decided to have my sister sit down and draw this man. What she drew was just a black figure with a hat, but while my mom was asking her about the man, she was telling my mom about the nice lady in the garden who wore tall boots and a dress that came up to her neck. Made us think of pioneer times, and there was a little boy with no shirt and a red spot on his chest who liked to play with her toys with her, and that was also weird because my brothers and sisters' toys would go off all the time. My mother then asked my brother if he had ever seen any of this, and he was about 3 at the time, and he said he had, but he never talked to them like my sister did. From this point on things just got wild. I mean, I would awaken in a dark room, unable to move, and merely observe flashes of light all around me, resembling cameras going off. Additionally, I would experience a sensation of being watched whenever I took a shower. My brother and sister didn't sleep in their room anymore, and finally my mom decided she was going to take the Bible and say some prayers in the house, which only made things even worse. At one point when she was saying a prayer, something started dripping from the ceiling that smelled like sulfur, and that was enough to scare her. We ended up packing up and staying with my aunt and uncle while my mom had paranormal investigators come to the house. They said that they caught more than one EVP in the house and felt something dark. One lady who joined later, even a few months after, said that her daughter was now seeing a man who fit that description. Thank God my mother is a reasonable woman and decided that it was time to leave, so we started packing up our house that week, leaving behind a lot of our furniture because it was vintage and my mom didn't want any chance that it wasn't the house it was attached to but an item instead to come with us. One night my parents had left with my siblings to go get something, and I looked into my parents' bedroom, and I saw the back of my stepdad's head standing by the bed, and I was asking him a question, and he wasn't responding, so I just rolled my eyes and went about my packing. Then they came home, and I asked if he had been with them all day, and he said yes, and then I told him about what I had seen, which only freaked us out even more. Then when we were finally loading our boxes into our U-Haul, I was walking out of the house, and out of nowhere it sounded like a handful of voices that were whispering just came right up to my ears. I dropped my boxes and sat in the car crying until we finally left for good. I hiked through a Scottish ghost town at night. For the past 2.5 years now, I have been living in the north of the Scottish Highlands, and when I say north, I mean as far north as you can possibly go. I live in a small coastal town, which is actually the northernmost town on the British mainland. I had always wanted to live in the Scottish Highlands, which seemed a far cry from my gloomy hometown back in England, and when my dad and his partner told me they'd bought an old house up here, I jumped at the opportunity. From what they told me, this place sounded like the perfect destination. There were seals and otters in the town's river, dolphins and orcas in the sea, and at certain times of the year, you could see the northern lights in the night sky. But despite my initial excitement of finally getting to live in the Scottish Highlands, full of beautiful mountains, amazing wildlife, and vibrant culture, I would soon learn the region I had just moved to was far from the idyllic destination I had dreamed of. In my spare time, I took to exploring the coastline around the town's area. On one of these days, I started to explore what was east of the town. On the right-hand side of the mouth of the river, there's an old ruin of a castle, but past that leads to a cliff trail around the eastern coastline. 6 or so months later and into the Christmas season, I'd just gotten out of a long-distance relationship. Feeling as though I had finally found closure, I decided I wanted to go on a long hike by myself along the cliff trail. And so, the day after Christmas, Boxing Day, I got my backpack together, packed a lunch for myself, and headed out at 6 a.m. The hike along the trail had taken me all day, and by the evening, I had walked so far that I actually discovered what I first thought was a ghost town. What I found was an abandoned port settlement, which had the creepiest looking dispersion of old stone houses, as well as what looked like the ruins of an ancient round tower. As it turned out, this was actually a heritage center, a tourist spot. It seemed I had walked so far around the rugged terrain that I was now 10 miles outside of my town. On the other side of this settlement were very high, distant cliffs, which, compared to the cliffs I had already trekked along, were far grander. Although I could feel my legs finally begin to give way and was already anticipating a long journey back along the trail, I decided I was going to cross the bay and reach the cliffs, and then make my way back home. By the time I was making my way around the bay, it had become very dark. I had already walked past more than half of the bay, but the cliffs didn't feel any closer. It was at this point when I decided I really needed to turn around, as at night, walking back along the cliff trail was going to be dangerous, and for the parts of the trail that led down to the base of the cliffs, I really couldn't afford for the tide to cut off my route. I made my way back through the abandoned settlement of the Heritage Center, and at night, this place definitely felt more like a ghost town. Shining my phone flashlight in the windows of the old stone houses, I was expecting to see a face or something peer out at me. What surprisingly made these houses scarier at night was a handful of old fishing boats that had been left outside them. The wood they were made from looked very old, and the paint had mostly been weathered off. But what was more concerning was that in this abandoned ghost town of a settlement, I wasn't alone. A van had pulled up, with 3 or 4 young men getting out. I wasn't sure what they were doing exactly, but they were burning things in a trash can. What it was they were burning, I didn't know, but as I made my way out of the abandoned settlement, every time I looked back at the men by the van, at least one of them was watching me. Already feeling scared of the creepy surroundings, I now felt very unsafe because of these men, staring suspiciously at me. I was paranoid that they were going to try and follow me, as if I had caught them doing something illegal. Thankfully, they stayed where they were, as I continued to make my way out of the ghost town and back along the trail. The abandoned settlement. The creepy men burning things by their van. That wasn't even the creepiest thing I came across on that hike. The creepiest thing I found actually came as soon as I decided to head back home, before I was even back at the Heritage Center. But that's a whole other story. My biggest paranormal experience, true. To start off with, I'm a 19-year-old female, and at the time of this story, I was around 15. I want to make it clear that I am a very spiritual person and have had many encounters with the paranormal before, but this one was the most terrifying yet. Every year for work, my mother has a convention at a hotel that was built in the late 1700s. The place is massive and overall elegant. Since her work has been going there for years, our family gets a discount whenever we want to venture there for a vacation. This was my first time at the hotel, and I instantly loved it. With me were my father, brother, and, of course, my mother. When we first got into our room, there was just a dreading feeling whenever I entered my room alone, so I tried to only go in there with my brother. We had a lot of fun eating gourmet food, getting a spa treatment, and wandering around the hotel grounds. I was outside one day with my camera and decided to take a picture of the main building. As I was looking through the camera, I noticed tiny windows at the top of the building. Nothing unusual, just windows to the old maid's quarters, my mom said, but I still got a weird feeling from just looking at them, and it didn't help that most of the windows were broken or even open in the dead of winter. One night after dinner, my mother and I decided to walk around the interior of the hotel while my brother and dad rested in the room. It was around 8 p.m., and there were very few people, especially if you strayed away from the main entrance. We took our time walking around and looking at various rooms, including a movie theater that we both refused to enter. Before we headed to bed, we decided to go to the very top floor to look out some of the windows to get a better view of the town below. We entered the nearest elevator and pressed floor 16. As we were going up, my brother called to ask us where we were, and my mom and he started chatting. All of a sudden the elevator doors opened, and we were both frozen in place. The door opened, and we both got hit with an incredibly cold breeze, along with a pitch black room. We both immediately pressed a different floor because we could sense that we weren't supposed to be there. I squeezed my eyes shut because I was so scared something was going to pop out at me. Suddenly the doors close, and we both start to relax, but all of a sudden the numbers on the elevator's display panel start going crazy. It was rapidly displaying 2 and then various other numbers, including those that weren't even listed as a button on the elevator. I got so scared, and my mother and I were hanging on to each other in complete terror. By this time, my mother was off the phone with my brother, and we had no idea what was going on. All of a sudden the panel displays floor 15 and the doors open up. Not wanting to stay on the elevator, we decided to use the stairs. As we started making our way to the stairs, I started to feel a presence behind us. I let my mother know what I was sensing, and she just told me to not look back and to walk as fast as possible. That statement freaked me out even more because my mother usually doesn't feel that kind of energy. As we are making our way down the stairs, I decide to look back, and what I saw will stick with me forever. I saw a tall, black, mist-like shadow figure a few feet behind us. It didn't have any features and seemed to stand still. We kept running until we hit the main floor, and we could finally breathe. We decided to look at the elevator to see if the floor we selected had an employees only sign, but it didn't. On our way back to our room, we figured out that we must have accidentally made our way up to the old maid's quarters, which sent chills up my spine. My mom also came to the conclusion that the cold air must have just been the winter air making its way through the broken/open windows. I agreed, but the cold air felt different from the crisp winter air from outside, but I could have just imagined that. When we got back to our room, my brother asked what happened, and we told him the whole story. All of a sudden he looked at us with a weirded out look on his face, and he told us that while on the phone with my mom when the elevator doors opened, he heard a bunch of whispers come through our end. This freaked me out so much, and I opted to sleep in my mother's room the rest of the trip. Nothing else happened during our vacation, and we left a few days later. My mom still has her convention there every year, and now that I'm employed with her, I go as well. Whenever I go, I always experience things, but nothing that extreme. My house is haunted, and I want to tell some stories. My house has been in my family for around 2 generations, so it's a bit old. Maybe 80 years? Probably more. Everyone who has lived in my house has experienced something unexplainable that we all chalk up to ghosts. My family is somewhat spiritual, more so than the average person. We use sage and incense to cleanse the space when the vibes are negative, and we are open to the idea of ghosts, spirits, and concepts like give to the universe and you get back. But that's fairly boring, and I'm moving soon to a brand new house that's being built, so I'm going to lose all the ghost buddies that have terrorized or taken care of me my whole life. Here are some highlights I've had. Lying in bed late one night and trying to get to sleep, I have my foot out of my covers and slightly hanging off of my bed. Something grabs it and pulls, I get tugged off my bed, and my bed moves a whole half meter. I was scared absolutely shitless because nobody was in my room, and before that, my dog refused to come into it. I just slowly went back onto my bed and curled up in a ball under my covers. One night I go into my back area/laundry to see my brother's ex-partner standing at the top of the stairs looking pale and terrified as she calls out for my brother. I come up behind her and ask what she's doing. She jumps a bit but calms down, and eventually my brother comes back upstairs. My yard is pitch black at night, so I just assumed she was wondering where he was until later I found out that she saw an old-looking lady in, like, a Victorian-style dress near the tree in my backyard just standing there. Everyone in my house has had some sort of experience with her. For example, when I was getting clothes off the line, She was just there, staring at me. I nearly died. One time I entered my room, and it was really, really hot, like boiling hot, but it was winter. I'm Australian living in a tropical area, so I'm used to heat, but in the winter it never really goes above 20 degrees Celsius, which is freezing for me, and had a really negative and heavy atmosphere. I was so tired, and it was after work, so I just said, "Yo, can you duck off right now? It's not the time." And after a few seconds, my room cooled down and went back to normal. I was in my shower one time at 11 p.m. when I heard my mom laughing right outside the door. I froze and became completely silent because she usually goes to sleep around 8 p.m. After a couple of seconds of silence, I heard footsteps walking away from the door and into my backyard. Then, I heard my dog sprinting through the laundry room. The bathroom is part of the laundry, down the stairs, barking and screaming her head off. She has 3 types of barks, a playful high-pitched one, a warning bark for when someone is just walking down the street, and her guard dog bark that is loud, deep, and terrifying. She was using her guard dog. My younger sister has so many stories of her toys just flying off the shelves in her old room, and back when I was in that room, the same thing happened. What also happened was the closet. That room is the only one with the built-in closet. It's also the smallest room, opening and closing throughout the night. Allow me to inform you that I am currently 16 years old, and I still encounter difficulty in opening and closing it, as the sliding components are rusted and the door is quite heavy. As a child my grandfather died, great-grandfather, we just called him Grandpa though, and after his funeral I was sitting on my bed and crying to myself because I missed him, and this was my first experience with mortality. 2 people enter my room and start comforting me. I recognized one as my grandpa, but I had absolutely no clue who the second person was. That was until a couple of years later when I saw a photo of my grandma, Grandpa's wife, and realized it was her. She died before I was born. All my life I've been told she's my guardian angel and is the reason why I get into so many deadly situations and come out alive and okay. My middle name is her name, which is a nice little thing. Her name is my middle name because when I was born, a couple of hours after, when my grandpa got to see me, I apparently gave him a look that my grandma used to give him all the time, and he went, "God, she looks like Tui." Or something, so they made my middle name her name. At night you will always hear footsteps walking down my hall. Either it's the house settling, or it's someone walking. And most of the time, you can hear distinct footsteps. Sometimes I also hear the sound of my dead dog crying. It kind of freaks me out. If I have my hand hanging off my bed at night, I can feel someone holding it. They are not doing anything bad, they just hold my hand. Sometimes I also feel that feeling of someone brushing their thumb over my knuckles. It's nice. It's not nice, however, when I get the feeling of hot breath on my hand. My house is 2 stories. The first story has the, formerly, front room, which is now my brother's room, and my pop's workshop. We live upstairs, about 8 or so meters up. I'm bad at estimating. But the tapping at the windows is really weird, and I hate it. Plus I hear knocks on my door all the time. I know better than to open my door when I hear 3 knocks, but sometimes I hear rapid loud knocking on my door, and when I open it, there's nothing there. Freaky. The final little thing about my house, which is more sad than scary, is that my pop died last month, and he spent a lot of time under the house in his workshop doing stuff since he was a builder. Nobody can go under there now since there's just a heavy feeling of being watched. Not watched in a bad way, but just watched. Like someone's observing you. I hope he's watching over us, but I also hope he was able to pass on peacefully. Anyways, that's something that happens in my house that I remember. I hope if you made it to the end, you enjoyed it. I mainly wrote this for myself, since I get really bad paranoia the moment ghosts and stuff get brought up. This is like exposure therapy? Confronting my fears? Or like acknowledging it? I don't know. But I hope the thought helps me feel peaceful at night. And I hope it helps me sleep tonight. Zombie Road in St. Louis, my experiences. I have had some experiences growing up on Zombie Road out in the St. Louis suburbs/rural areas. These experiences are spread out over, 3 years. Well, here it goes. Around junior year of high school, I and my 2 best friends were having a sleepover out in Wildwood, Missouri, where the burbs start becoming a little more rural out in St. Louis. One of my friends who was interested in supernatural things suggested we go there. I was told by my friend that this was a place where many paranormal things happened. I was told that there were shadow people, ghosts, possible illegal drug smuggling, people having died at the end, and so on. Growing up I was always interested in the paranormal but did not know what to believe, but I would go seeking thrills and so on. Zombie Road is essentially a path that is surrounded by a valley. At night it is dark and creepy. For the first 5 to 10 minutes of walking, there is a house on each ledge. Then you lose those houses, and it becomes just a trail surrounded by trees. It is creepy. The entrance just happens to be near an elementary school. I did not know the first few times, but at night the path was trespassing, especially around Halloween. There was some construction there for my first few experiences that was making Zombie Road into a walking trail from gravel to paved sidewalk. My first few experiences it was incomplete, and now it is a walking trail at night, to try and get rid of the stigma and such. Here is what has happened over 4 or 5 times there. They get progressively weirder, especially the last one. First time, I and my 2 best friends show up. Walk about 2 minutes in and turn around. It is dark, and we are pussies. We turn around. Second time, I and the same group walk a little bit in there for about 15 minutes and turn around. It is creepy, but we do not think anything is out of the ordinary, though. We just felt watched and all. Third time, I and the same 2 go out at like 2 a.m. to the trail. Earlier that day my GF at the time broke up with me, so I was pissed at the world and did not care really. We get about 20 minutes of walking in the trail and eventually turn back. My friends thought they saw shadowy figures in the corner, and they noticed lights flickering in the houses at the edge. I was too pissed at the world at the time, but my friends were pretty scared. These were along about a year. I was 2 but did not care enough. Fourth time, I and the same 2 amigos go to Zombie Road one last time before college for old time's sake. We make it pretty far down it, about 30 minutes of walking. And had the usual occur, felt watched, possibly heard or saw things, or had our imaginations run wild. This time me and my friend get pretty far down there, but we start to hear coyotes or something along those lines, so we turn around to be safe. Now here come the 2 most recent, and fun, and paranormal experiences. Fifth time, this time it was me, one of my best friends from the previous 4 times, and one of our lady friends. We were home from college for winter break. We are walking relatively close, each trying to keep our lady friend comforted. Then in front of us we see a big black shape or something. It howled at us, and we ran in the other direction for about a minute. No one saw what it was, but it just snarled at us. It seemed like it was about 1 foot by 1 foot. I thought it was a possum or something. We walked very fast back after that out of the road. Sixth time, the big one, so it is me and the best friend who has been on every one of these experiences and 2 of our friends we dragged along. At this point, I and my friend are cocky, while still nervous, and bring our friends in, telling my friends the stories that have occurred here and so on. My friend, who was there for his first time, was using his iPhone at the time as a flashlight and also talking relatively loud. We always had flashlights on our previous excursions, but we usually kept them off to let our eyes adjust. So we get about 10 to 15 minutes into the walk. I remember saying something trying to scare my friends. This is what I recall. I was saying, this is one of the scariest places in St. Louis, and then it happened. About 35 feet to our right, we heard a very very loud demonic feminine scream that sounded to me like it was from someone about middle-aged. It lasted for about 5 seconds or so. For a split second, my friends and I were petrified until I yelled, "Run," and we ran as fast as we could off that road. I tried to keep everyone relatively together in a group. Smart, huh? But we ran the duck out of there. Never have I been so scared in my life. Eventually we drive to my house later that night, and we go on the Prairie Farms website that describes Zombie Road to read about what just happened. I am reading the website out to the friends when I get to a part that freaks me out, and that of a mysterious old woman who yells at passers-by from a house at the end of the road. I am thinking, holy ducking crap. I went to bed playing the song No One Believes Me by Kid Cudi on repeat. Scariest moment of my life. We came to the conclusion that one of these things happened. A. That place is haunted. B. There is some combo of a ghost or haunted lady that lives in a shack down there. C. We got ducking followed. D. Someone does this and likes to duck with people. E. Maybe there was illegal drug stuff going on back there, and this was a warning to scare the people like me that went down there for the paranormal. Thoughts? Here is the thing. Our eyes could have been playing tricks on us the first few times with the shadow people and images. But holy shit, I got scowled at by some small animal and heard that ducking scream. For my friend's 7th time, he walked down during the daytime all the way there and back. He said he got to see the train tracks. He also got some ticks or something not good. He is good and all now. That last time was over 2 years ago. I plan on going back eventually, been dealing with some knee injuries of late, which are healing, when I can sprint away at full speed. Unfortunately, that does not look like it will be occurring in the next few months. Hopefully I did not go off on too many tangents. Also, if anyone has had any experiences there at Zombie Road or any comments, then I would love to hear them. My mom's near-death encounter with the paranormal. My mom, who we'll call L, had a friend, who we'll call E, who lived in a council house with her nan. Her nan died, and so she didn't have anywhere to go. L let E stay with her at the time. At that time, my mom had my brother J, who was about 2 years old, and E babysat him for L. L had come home to E playing the Ouija board while she was supposed to be looking after my brother. Because my mom caught her off guard, E didn't properly say goodbye and just kind of threw it away in a panic. That's when stuff started happening. My brother always said something about a little boy and that the boy was the one throwing his toys out the window, but now my mom could hear the boy calling her name. She also would randomly go into trances out of nowhere. My mom's brother T was looking after J while L had a bath. During her bath, she had leaned back to wash her hair under the water. When she tried to sit up, she found that she couldn't. She was under there long enough that she started to black out. When she did eventually surface, it was because all of a sudden it was just like there were no hands on her shoulders holding her under. She doesn't remember how long she was under there, as she had no way of telling. But ever since all of those things happened to her, she's been cautious about what she does. She still believes in ghosts, but she wouldn't want to encounter one ever again. And to be fair, I don't blame her for that. She allows me to explore the paranormal, but she has rules for me, like no Ouija board in her house. I could use a Ouija board at someone else's house if she doesn't mind, but I must be careful, and I always am. I always check with her before doing anything paranormal. But yeah, that's her story. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. I have some spooky, terrifying stories to share. I've been listening to scary stories like this one for a few years now, and I thought it was finally about time for me to share a few spooky stories of my own. To preface, I should note that I've always believed in the paranormal to some degree. I feel very strongly that there is a spiritual realm around us that we can't see, and that energy left behind in certain places can cause unexplainable ghostly activity. I hope that makes sense. I've never been fantastic at putting these beliefs concisely into words, but I will do my best to tell the following stories coherently. 1. The photo. When I was an infant, my mother told me that I reacted unexpectedly to a portrait of my deceased great-grandmother. There was no possible way for me to have ever seen her before. She had been long gone before I was ever born, but as my mom carried me past a photo of her that was hanging on the wall, I reached out to it, smiling and laughing with a sense of recognition and familiarity. As a baby, this was the only time I reacted to a photograph like this. My mom said it was as though I had met my great-grandmother previously. I have often heard that babies and young children are more receptive to spiritual entities and similar phenomena. My mom always said that we knew each other in heaven before I was born. I like to think it's more likely that my great-grandmother appeared to me as an infant at some point. What other reason would a baby have to react like this to a photograph? 2. The rocking chair. Another strange occurrence my mother has recounted from my infancy. One time, in the middle of the night, she woke and decided to check on me. She got out of bed and made her way to my room, but upon reaching the threshold, she stopped dead in her tracks. There was a rocking chair positioned next to my crib, which, of course, was empty at the time, as it was only her, my father, and myself in the house. As my mother recalls, she could sense someone sitting in the rocking chair, watching over my crib, despite nothing physically being there. She knew I wasn't alone in that room. I should pause here to mention that she's a bit more sensitive to these kinds of things. She's not a medium or anything, but she has a way of sensing energy, whether it be of the living or dead. She said this particular energy, whatever or whoever it was, made her so uneasy that she couldn't bring herself to enter the room. At the same time, however, she could also sense that I was safe under this entity's watchful eye. She could tell that this energy did not belong to anyone she was familiar with and guessed that it could have been a deceased relative of my father paying me a little visit. Confident that whatever it was wouldn't hurt her, but too shaken to enter the room, she backed away and returned to her bed to sleep. 3. The phone calls. My maternal great-grandfather died a week after I was born. My mom had a very close relationship with him growing up and was understandably heartbroken when he passed. In the weeks following his death, she received a number of phone calls to our house that she insists were from her grandfather. On several occasions, she would pick up the phone and hear dead silence on the other end. She knew deep down that this was her grandfather trying to assure her that he was at peace in the afterlife. The calls persisted, and she finally asked her grandfather to stop. They were beginning to make her uneasy, and she had gotten his message. She never got a call like that again. 4. The cuckoo clock. This story occurred years before I was born. My parents, still only just dating, went to visit my father's family in New York. They stayed at my great-grandmother's house, the same great-grandmother from the first story, who had already passed by this point as well. For whatever reason, they slept in separate rooms. I should note that these rooms were in the attic of the house, as if this occurrence wasn't creepy enough on its own. My mom said she was on edge the second she stepped through the front doors. She and my dad think there were multiple spirits hanging around, and she could sense them. My mother stayed in a room that had belonged to one of my father's aunts. In the room was a cuckoo clock that hadn't been wound in years. I'm sure you can see where this is going. In true haunted house horror movie fashion, this long, silent and non-functional cuckoo clock went off in the middle of the night. Utterly terrified, my mother leapt out of bed and ran to my father's room. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. 5. The wife. This story is one of my own and is the only truly spooky occurrence I have experienced myself. When I was probably about 16 or 17, I had some younger kids that I babysat every once in a while. I'm usually bad with kids, especially those who need a lot of help, but it was good money, and I managed to figure it out. The younger of the two kids was about 2 or 3 at the time the incident happened. I was helping him get into his pajamas for the night and had him in the bathroom so he could brush his teeth and get ready for bed. The door was open, and out of nowhere, this child just blurts, "She can see me." I freeze and look down at him to see that he was staring out into the empty hallway. Great. I ask him what he means, and he says, "It's the wife, she can see me." I ask again what he means and if he can see someone in the hallway. He just continues to stare and smile but doesn't say anything else. I finish getting him ready and put him to bed, deciding to just try and forget about it. I was at least relieved that he didn't seem to feel scared or threatened by whatever he saw, but I spent the rest of the night curled in a chair waiting for the parents to return and desperately trying to distract myself on my phone. Thankfully, whatever entity that kid saw didn't bother me that night or any other night I was over there. I know this isn't super scary, but I can't deny that I was a little unsettled by what he said and by what I couldn't see. 6. The floor. I don't know that this story is exactly paranormal, but it was a kind of strange occurrence. I currently live in one of the oldest and supposedly most haunted cities in America, at least that's what they tell the tourists. It was last May when I moved out of my college dorm into an off-campus house with 3 other roommates. Most of the houses in this city are at least 100 years old. This particular house was somewhere up in the 200s, from what I remember being told. It had been through a revolving door of residents and countless renovations and remodels. I'm not sensitive to the paranormal in any capacity and have no desire to be, but one of my roommates is. She actually has experienced spiritual presences in this city on several occasions, but those are probably stories for another time. This roommate also happens to have a dog, who I love dearly, I should mention. We move into the house, and again, in the true spirit of a cliché horror movie, the dog won't enter my room. Instead, she stands at the threshold and does this nervous wiggle, throwing her head around, whining, and refusing to come in. I trust a dog's sense of judgment more than any human I've ever met. They can sense and perceive things we can't. Now knowing the dog is too scared to enter my room, I spend my first night in that house freaked out and unable to sleep, absolutely convinced my room is haunted. I don't think I have the emotional strength to wake up and see some apparition appear in the middle of the night. I do not vibe with that. In the days that followed, my sensitive roommate decided to investigate. Upon entering my room, she described a prickling feeling on the back of her neck and confirmed that something was indeed wrong. Her mother and her mother's boyfriend were in town helping us get settled and decided to investigate as well. From what I'm told, the mother's boyfriend is the most sensitive of all 3 of them. He identifies the problem immediately. According to him, the house had begun harboring negative energy because of a terrible hack job in the floor. He drew our attention to a patch of wood in the middle of my room that didn't match the rest of the house. Apparently the house was angry at having been defaced like this. I'd like to pause again to say I find it hard to believe a house is a sentient thing that can feel anger, but I believe negative residual energy can build up and become strong enough to be perceived, especially in such an old building. My roommate put her hand on the patch and claimed that it felt hot compared to the rest of the cold wooden floor. The boyfriend recommended that I put a rug over the patch, and the 3 of them proceeded to clear the room. Weirdly enough, the dog had no problem entering my room from that point forward. I'm not sure what exactly I believe here, but I definitely think it's safe to say there was some weird energy lingering in that room. Whether it belonged to the house or had been left behind by past residents, I really can't say. It's interesting to think that energy can become attached to a building this way and even become concentrated in just one room. Maybe it manifested into some kind of sentient, bitter entity? I'm curious to know if anyone else has ever had an experience like this because this was the first time I'd ever been told a house could feel. I'm about to move into a new house in the same city. I'll be happy to share about any strange experience I may have there as well. Wish me luck. An entity terrorized my family for years. This is a story I have never shared with anyone outside of my family who shared these experiences with me. Believe me or not, this happened, and it has left me and my family traumatized for years. When I was about 12 years old, my mother and I moved to a small rural town on the Wasatch back in Utah. Being a single working mother, my mom couldn't afford the home on her own, so we shared the home with my Aunt Tricia and my younger cousin Jordan, and also our Yorkshire Terrier, Little Chef. We stayed in the home for approximately 2.5 years, and the experiences from those years continue to haunt me deeply to this day. To give you an idea of the home's layout, the main living area is just inside the front door. At the opposite end of the room was the back door. To the left was a small open kitchen. If you walked to the right, you would enter a small hallway that led to 4 bedrooms. First there was the master bedroom on the right-hand side where my mother slept. Next, on the left was my cousin's room, and across the hall was a shared bathroom. My room was next to my cousin's, and then across from me was my aunt's room. Fortunately, I did not experience the brunt of the strange occurrences that would occur over the coming years, and the events that happened started off relatively small. For example, during our second week in the house, I remember my mother and I sitting in the living room watching a movie one night when Little Chef, the dog, started barking aggressively at the wall opposite us where the TV was set up. Little Chef had only ever barked when someone would knock on the door, and there he was barking and growling and bristling at this wall. I remember my mom and I dismissing it that first time and telling him to be quiet. However, this behavior would continue to occur randomly for the entirety that we lived at the house. There was no tip-off of when it would happen, but suddenly the chef would begin aggressively barking and growling at the same wall, always the same wall. Day or night he would perk up, as if something were extremely wrong, and he would freak out. Outside of this I did not experience much else for a few months. Then Christmas came. My younger cousin got this large Bratz doll bust that was made for doing makeup and hair. The head was a turntable, and I remember being creeped out by it because I never liked dolls. They gave me the heebie-jeebies, but my cousin loved it. She played with it all the time. One evening she had been playing with the doll in the same living room where our dog would bark at the wall. I distinctly remember that my cousin had the doll's head facing towards the back door at the end of the room because she was practicing braiding hair, which was a small relief for me because I did not like seeing its large eyes staring at me. As the evening progressed, I recalled my younger cousin retiring to bed prior to myself, while I remained in the living room to complete the movie we had begun. Eventually I got tired and went down the hall to my room and fell asleep. At some point in the night I woke up needing a drink of water. I passed my cousin's room, and her door was open, and I saw that she was asleep in her bed. As I headed down the hall and towards the kitchen, I had to pass through the living room, and I remember stopping dead in my tracks. The Bratz doll head had been turned completely around and was facing the hallway that led to the bedrooms. At first I thought maybe my cousin had woken up and come out to play with the doll, but that didn't make sense. By the time I went to sleep it was at least 11:30, and she had gone to bed before me. Why would she wake up in the middle of the night to play with the doll bust? I didn't really know what to make of it, but I remember just feeling uneasy and immediately turning around, forgetting about my glass of water, and going back to my room and closing the door behind me. The Bratz doll head often looked in a different direction than my cousin had left it, and others in the house noticed this too, but only if my cousin left it in the living room. Eventually, it scared her, and she refused to keep it in her room. Another night, I remember I had woken up in the middle of the night with a queasy feeling. Maybe I had had a bad dream, I don't know. For context, my room was small with a bunk bed, a small closet close to the door, and one window at the far end of the room. I used to always sleep with my head to the wall with the window. When I sat up on my bed that night, I remember staring at the wall across from me, and at first I was not sure what I was looking at. The image resembled the projection of a large man's shadow on my wall. I remember whipping around in bed to look out the window next to me, thinking there was someone standing outside my window, but all I saw was the moon outside. When I looked back at the wall, the shadow man was still there. Now, before we lived in this house, I had always considered myself a skeptic, and at 12 years old, I wasn't about to let myself get scared over a shadow without first exhausting all reasonable rationale. I remember thinking to myself, it is just to be a projection of something in my room. I turned my lamp on, but the shadow didn't shift or change. I remember steeling myself against the dread I was feeling building inside me, and I began moving every item in my room that could possibly be projecting a shadow on that far wall. Still, the shadow man remained. At that point my 12-year-old bravery was exhausted, and I noped out of there as fast as I could. I crawled into bed with my mom that night, and the next morning I told her what happened. Of course, she dismissed my experience and told me I was either just seeing things or that I had a bad dream. However, after seeing that shadow man on my wall, I refused to sleep in my room. For the 2.5 years we lived in that house, I slept in my mother's room on the floor. I was so terrified of the shadow figure on my wall that I could not set foot inside the room at night. After the first few nights of me sleeping in her room, my mother decided to put an end to my little shadow man phobia. Once bedtime rolled around, my mother marched me to my room and told me I needed to sleep on my own and that I was too old to be sleeping in her room every night. By this point I was close to turning 13. Can you imagine being so terrified of your bedroom that you would rather sleep in your mom's room on the floor than in your bed? But, when she marched me into my room and tucked me into my bed, I saw that same shadow against my wall. And my mom saw it too. She was a bit taken aback, but whatever her gut reaction was, she swallowed it and came to the same conclusion I had, that something was casting the shadow. She moved everything in my room, and I mean everything, but the shadow man remained. She tried to justify it by blaming the lighting, but even her argument sounded iffy. After seeing the shadow man for herself, my mom gave in and didn't argue about me sharing her room because she knew that I was so afraid of this weird shadow. I also remember my mom being extremely anal about closing all the cupboards in the kitchen. Like, if I even left one of them open because I knew I was about to put away a box of cereal in a few minutes, or whatever, she would tell me to close the cupboards. When I was younger, I did not pay much attention to it, as my mother had always exhibited slight obsessive-compulsive tendencies. However, one day, after we had vacated the residence, I inquired as to why open cupboards distressed her so profoundly. She told me that one afternoon when she had gotten off work early, she had been the only one at the house. My cousin and I were both at school, and my aunt usually didn't get home from work until after 5 p.m. My mom told me when she got home one of the upper cupboards had been left wide open, and she shrugged it off and figured one of us kids had forgotten to close it that morning before leaving for school. My mom usually left the house before everyone else, and my aunt would take us to school. Therefore, she said she thought nothing of it, and she closed the cupboard and turned away to open the fridge to make herself a late lunch. She said that Chef went sprinting from her side in the kitchen and began growling and barking hysterically. She said he charged into the living room and faced the same wall he always barked at. It had happened so often and so randomly that my mom said she had just told the dog to shut up, and she turned to get a spoon or fork or whatever she needed from one of the drawers behind her. Then, she told me that when she had turned around, every single cupboard in the kitchen was wide open. Another experience I remember was that there was one morning when I had still been sleeping in my room, before the shadow man, that I remember my cousin telling me I had really scared her the night before. I had asked her what she meant, and she told me that she had woken up at some point in the night to observe me sleepwalking up and down the hall. She said I was muttering to myself and that it scared the absolute shit out of her, not her exact words. She was probably 10 at the time. I denied sleepwalking and told her she probably dreamed it. I had never sleepwalked before in my life. But, she said that it had scared her so bad that she ran past me into her mom's room. My aunt verified her account and told me that I had been in the hallway talking nonsense to myself and pacing back and forth down the hallway and that she, my aunt, actually had to coax me back into my bed. I never walked again after we moved out of that house. If you have listened this far, I salute you because things only get worse from here. At this point I was virtually sharing the master bedroom with my mom, and because I was such a fidgety sleeper, I slept on the floor most nights so I wouldn't keep my mom up. Two things happened in this room, one scarier than the other. Firstly, the door to my mom's room would randomly slam shut as if some force had closed it. I mean, the door would go from being wide open, it opens into the room, to slamming closed. Then, after a few moments of slamming closed, the door would slowly creak back open. The handle would not turn or anything like that. It would just slowly blow open, as if it had not been slammed closed moments before. This in and of itself was horrifying, but what happened in that room next was worse. The master bathroom in the master bedroom was the only one that had a bathtub, and occasionally my younger cousin would bathe in it and play with her toys. She had this animatronic Ariel doll whose tail would light up all sorts of colors, and she would also talk. One night, after falling asleep, a dreadful sound from the bathroom shocked both my mom and me awake. I sat up from my place on the floor and saw from under the door light shifting color from red to green and back to red. There was this terrible gurgling screaming sound accompanying this barrage of colors from behind the closed bathroom door. I had never heard anything like it, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I leapt into bed next to my mom and pulled the blankets around me. My mom sat frozen for only a few moments before sprinting out of the bed and towards the bathroom door. With a scream, she flung the bathroom door open, and when she returned, she had the mermaid Ariel in her hand. As scary as this was, it actually was comical as well. My mother ran screaming at the top of her lungs with this malfunctioning doll outstretched in front of her. I followed her out of the room and remember watching as she unlocked the front door and flung the doll outside before slamming it closed and turning the lock. I just remember laughing as she pressed her back to the front door and clutched her chest. As horrifying as the experience had been, watching my mom run screaming to the door and flinging that monster doll out into the snow was funny to me. The weird thing was, my cousin had played with that doll in the bathtub multiple times, and it had never malfunctioned like it did that night. Once, my mom, aunt, cousin, and I were all out of the house for about a week, possibly because we had driven down to Moab to visit our grandparents, and my mom mentioned that she had asked my uncle to watch the dog. He spent one day inside the house and was so creeped out that he called my mom to tell her he refused to sleep in the house and that he had taken little Chef with him and driven the hour and a half back home at 9 p.m. Finally, and most terrifying of all, was what my aunt shared about an experience she had in the home. What she told me will forever haunt me. She had said that every now and again she would hear strange noises coming from her closet. She couldn't quite explain it, and when she tried, she used to choke up and become emotional. Not in the sense that she was sad, but she was so upset by her experience that the words would choke her up and her eyes would begin to water. I don't know what sounds she heard in her closet, but she said that the fear she felt from hearing them would make her freeze. But that is not the worst of it. One night, a strange light abruptly woke her from a deep sleep. This strange gut feeling was telling her to open her eyes. She said when she did what she saw, it gave her a heart attack. She said there at the edge of the bed, staring directly at her, was the old, grotesque, wrinkled face of a woman smiling at her. She said she was petrified, frozen by such an absolute primal fear that she couldn't even scream. She said the old woman had wiry white hair and disgustingly cloudy eyes and that she just stared and smiled. My aunt was not sure how long the scene went on for, but she said every moment that passed was filled with absolute, excruciating fear. Then, in a split second, she said the woman's mouth opened unbelievably wide as if in a scream, but no sound came out. At this point my aunt refused to tell us any more, and due to her emotional reaction to just telling us that much, my mom and I didn't want to push her. My aunt and my cousin moved out of the house the next day and went to stay with my grandparents in southern Utah and ended up living there for a few years afterwards. My mother ended up putting the house up for sale, and we moved in with her current boyfriend at the time. Overall, the things that happened to me and my family in that house will remain with me forever. I have not had a paranormal experience ever again after leaving that house, and I hope to God I never do. My childhood memories are filled with terrifying experiences. These memories have never been documented or discussed before. The partial layout of my house is important. When you walk into my house through the front door, you immediately enter a hallway spanning to the left and right of you. It's about 50 feet. On the right side is my childhood room, and on the left is my mother's room. Between the front door and my room is an unused closet. It's just a very shallow, basic closet, but to get from my room to my mom's, you have to pass it. First one. It was very simple and kind of stupid, but it happened, and I can't explain it. It sets up the second one. This is a lifelong ordeal. I was young, probably 4 years old. I was sleeping in my bed, which is up against a wall in my room. If you're lying in my bed and looking towards your feet, you can see the door to my room, which I always kept open. The first time it happened I was sleeping as usual but woke up slowly. I opened my eyes to almost a squint like you do in the morning, and through my eyelids I saw at my door these 3 cutout cartoon-style alien drawings posted on a stick like you would do for a protest sign, about a foot or so high. They were being held by something, and I couldn't see what or who, but it was moving them in a dancing motion, like you'd move an action figure when playing with a child. I didn't know what it was, so I immediately just closed my eyes hard and waited about a minute. I opened my eyes again, and they were gone. These events happened at least 2 times a week for over a month. I'd see these things just playing with the signs. I never got a good look at what they looked like, but I got a feeling the beings or living things were the signs, not whatever is moving it, if that makes sense. I got so freaked out by this that I told my mom, and she just brushed it off and offered to hang out in my room every night until I fell asleep. Some nights they wouldn't come because she was there or had been there. When I fell asleep, she'd go back to her room, down the hall, but they started appearing more and more often, even though she would wait until I slept that night. I had seen them probably 30 times at this point. Still extremely terrified of the figures, I decided one night that when I woke up in the middle of the night, I would run down the hall and into my mom's room to sleep with her and feel safe. So I did that. Nothing happened, they didn't appear, and I didn't see them for about a week. I kept up the habit of running to my mom's room down the hall, though. It was all fine, and I thought they were gone. Until one night I was planning on doing my usual routine. Run down the hall, get to my mom, and sleep safe. Didn't go like that, lol. I woke up in the middle of the night as usual. Crept out of my room and into the hall. All I could see was pitch black all the way until the moon shone in through the frosted glass of the window and shot a thin beam of light onto the hallway wall. I started moving forward, in a hurried tiptoe pace. But as I got up to the closet door that's between the rooms, I felt myself slow down. Not as if I was slowing myself down, but like I was moving through molasses. I tried as hard as I could to break free from whatever was slowing me, because I had this sinking feeling about what would happen if I came to a complete stop. I finally broke free of it as I cleared the closet door by a few feet and crossed into the moon's light. I was shaken and crawled into my mom's bed. I lay there until my body took me to sleep about an hour later. This happened again the next night. I was slowed as I closed my proximity to the closet, and as I hit the light, I was freed. I don't understand why I kept doing it, maybe because I was so afraid of whatever those stupid alien poster holding things were. But this happened every time. Single night. For months. I told everyone, no one cared. They thought I was just a kid with an imagination and brushed it off. There was always this absolute terror about what would happen if I didn't break free from whatever was pulling me back. I didn't know what would happen, but I didn't want to find out. I always felt like something was in the closet, somehow slowing me down and sucking me in. Weeks and weeks and weeks of it went by, running, slowing, breaking free, and making it to my mom. However, one night I just couldn't break free. I don't know what was different. At this point I had evolved from tiptoeing to just flat out sprinting. This night I woke up, headed out the door, and started running to the room. I got near the closet, and the sound slowed, time slowed, my body slowed, and I could feel myself straining to make it. I remember the door on the closet just not being there that night. Not open, but just a black void with the hinges still protruding. If you can imagine the grungy wisps of black, almost like chopped off locks of hair, that's what was filling the closet. Literally terrified, my heart started pounding, and I slowed to a near stop. Whatever the black substance was, it formed into arm-like figures that wrapped around me, pressing my back against its chest and covering my mouth with its hand. I didn't scream because I couldn't, it wouldn't come out. I had no choice but to sit and wait. After only probably 10 seconds of silence, it receded into the closet, and I was freed. I ran to my mom's room and sat up all night. It never happened again after it got me that one time. Now I know how literally ridiculous, but I swear by my life, this happened and still affects me today. My parents ended up divorcing a few years later. My mom kept the house, and my dad moved into an apartment down the street. I was 14 at the time and was given the choice of who to live with. I literally chose to live with my dad because of my immense fear of that house and that closet. Since I moved out, I've never slept there again. I am currently 22 years old and enrolled as a college student, yet I continue to refuse to sleep there. I visit all the time because she's my mom and I love her, but that damn closet. Just that whole house. Never again. Since moving out, I haven't had similar experiences or seen anything weird. Nothing paranormal, even though I actively sought it out. The only strange thing that still lingers is that whenever I think about it, I feel watched. Very, very watched. I feel like whatever grabbed me has been with me ever since then, and if I think about it or speak about it, I feel like it's been woken up. It's a very tangible being watched feeling. And after I get that, I have severe sleep paralysis at least once that week. So here it comes this week. If you have any insight or understanding regarding this matter, it would be greatly appreciated. Please, kindly let me know. I want to know so much more, but I've always been afraid to talk or think about it, so I've never told anyone the full story. Personal paranormal story. I'm 25 years old, and this incident happened to me when I was 16. My parents were going through a divorce, and even though I was a teenager, I wasn't upset about it. In fact, I was happy because they used to fight a lot. My mom is a pharmacist, and she didn't work for a long time to raise me. Since I was already in high school, she wanted to return to work and gain her independence during this divorce. She was easily annoyed and edgy most of the time. When she opened her pharmacy that was a minimum of 1 hour's distance from our flat, she quickly got a lot of customers and became successful. Working in an industrial district far from the center of the city required a lot of night shifts because there weren't a lot of pharmacies in that area. This meant I had to spend a lot of nights alone. I was 16 and very mature, so this was not a problem for me. My best friend used to come over a lot, and we used to have sleepovers watching movies all night, stealing liquor from the cabinet in the living room, talking about boys, and eventually sleeping in my room. Once my mom was home when my friend came over. We had dinner together, and after dinner my mom suggested something that shocked me. First she told us this story about my grandmother and her friends. Apparently they had a seance when they were young women and talked to a spirit, asking him who they'll marry in the future. When the spirit answered with a name, he then also said death. My grandmother and her friends got spooked and ended the session. The girl who asked the question in the first place was still scared, so they joked around to comfort her, telling her the spirit is an idiot and messing with them. However, several years later she would actually marry a guy with the same name, but they would both die in a car accident. I could not believe what I was hearing because I only knew my 75-year-old grandmother, who was a very rational woman. Then my mom suggested that we do a seance. I was truly shocked. My parents are very rational people who believe in science. My mom is a believer but not religious, although she was kind of into psychics, readings, and stuff. But still, I knew she was telling the truth. There was no way she was making this story up if she didn't believe it wasn't true. As two teenagers, we got excited and told her yes. We didn't have a board, nor did we know what an Ouija board was. My mom asked us to write down letters on a paper and cut each of them. She then carefully placed the paper rectangles in a circle on our big dining table in the living room. We also wrote yes and no and put them into the circle. She then went to the kitchen and grabbed a small espresso cup. She put the cup upside down in the middle of the paper circle. I felt like I didn't know my own mom. With her request, we put our fingertips on the corners of the cup, but be careful, she said, don't press hard on it, just touch gently. She then started summoning a spirit from the world of spirits. She repeated the same sentence over and over again. I summon a spirit from the world of spirits, please move the cup if you're here. Nothing happened for over 10 minutes. I was getting bored, my friend was probably thinking, what the hell is happening here? And wondering whether the divorce made my mom crazy. But suddenly the cup moved. I will never forget that moment in my life. My first response was that someone moved it. It kept moving, not too slow, not too fast. My mom asked again, are you here? The cup went to yes. I started asking them if they moved it, just like in the movies. It was such a cliché moment, yet I was still spooked. Knowing my mom and my best friend, I knew they wouldn't move the cup. This was not a usual day and not a usual activity. My mom said we can ask questions now. We asked who we would marry, and it would answer us with actual names. The cup slowed down and stopped many times, and my mom had to repeat the summoning. So I would end up talking to different spirits. Sometimes the cup would go to different letters quickly, and the words would not make any sense. As we kept going, I wasn't feeling scared, it felt somehow comforting. I was skeptical, though, and kept asking my mom if she was making this up. She said I can also ask a question without talking, and the spirit would still understand and answer me. I asked a casual question in my mind, and the cup moved, it actually answered me. I think I didn't really believe until that moment, but now I was hooked. I really enjoyed being able to ask questions about the future. I thought horror movies were stupid because they always show this as a dangerous act. This was nice, and spirits were our friends. We kept going for a couple of hours and called it a night. In the next days I was still curious and wanted to try this cool seance again. My mom said we should be at least 3 people for it to work, but I begged her to try it once again with me. So we sat down at the same table and used the same paper pieces and the cup. My mom summoned a spirit, and we waited for at least 5 minutes. And then the cup moved. This time was different, it didn't feel right. I could feel the movement was aggressive, even fast. Our fingertips were just touching it, and there was no way neither of us could move it that way. My mom must have felt the same way, I could see it in her face. When we asked if there was a spirit with us in the room, the cup would move towards random letters and not make any sense. So my mom told it to leave and said goodbye. The cup kept moving. My mom asked if it wanted to stay, and it actually went to 2 letters, which would form the sentence I will not go. I had goosebumps all over my body. This entity formed a perfect sentence and continued moving the cup randomly in the circle. When my mom asked it to leave again, the cup was moving so fast that my arm was getting tired, and eventually both our arms would drop off the cup. I still recall that moment as the first time I couldn't rationalize what was happening. The cup was spinning wildly inside of the circle by itself. I saw an object moving by itself extremely fast for at least 5 seconds, and no one can take this memory away from me. I am doomed to believe in the paranormal. My mom actually had to catch the spinning cup, quickly repeat go away, and turn the cup upside down. It stopped. We didn't talk about it, and I went to my room. I didn't get a good night's sleep because I was too scared. About 2 months later, my mom was very busy, and I was spending too many nights alone. To be honest, I was still thinking about that day, and I was scared of the dark since, wondering if that thing actually stayed here. When you enter our apartment, You would first see the kitchen door, the living room would be on your left and a corridor on your right. My room was the first room on the left side when you enter the corridor, so it was right next to the kitchen. I was casually hearing sounds of furniture from the kitchen. I didn't have to put my ear on the wall, it sounded like someone was pulling the chairs and loudly opening and closing the cabinets in the kitchen. Most of the time I was too scared to go and look, but when I did, everything was ordinary. One day I was home alone, I was hanging in my room, talking to my boyfriend on the phone. He heard the noises from the cell phone and asked me what was going on. I told him it happened every night and it came from the kitchen. I also said it was the neighbors because it is an old building. I was also telling myself it was the neighbors, even though that didn't make any sense. 90% of people staying in that apartment were over 60, and I could hear the noises at 2 a.m. I went to bed shortly after and woke up in the middle of the night with horror. I was lying on my bed face down, and I couldn't move. I knew it was sleep paralysis, it had happened before, but this time it felt a lot different. I felt extremely terrified because I knew I was not alone. I felt a pressure on my lower back. I could still move my eyes, but because I was face down, I couldn't see anything, and it was also very dark. I knew feeling some pressure was normal when you have sleep paralysis, but there was no way I would believe this was just that. And then I felt it, 2 knees on the 2 sides of my body. It was sitting on me, I could feel some sort of knees or legs touching my arms. The pressure quickly turned into pain. Pain turned into agonizing pain, like I was being tortured. My lower back was crushed against the bed. I was paralyzed but still using every drop of energy in my body to get it moving. I could feel something behind my head too, like it was bending over me. The worst part is that it didn't end quickly. I don't know how long it took, but I was at a point of praying to God in my head and begging Him to rescue me. I was not a believer, but I could easily become a nun at that point. When I think about that pain today, I still get tears in my eyes. It is scary and emotional to remember that night. It ended at some point, and I cannot describe the panic I had. I even checked my lower back to see some kind of injury, but I couldn't see anything. I immediately turned the light on, crying, and called my boyfriend at 3 a.m. that morning. He never questioned whether I was making this up, and he believed in me. He was actually sure that I was bothered by the paranormal. I cried for a long time, we talked on the phone for over an hour, and I still didn't sleep after the phone call. I was too terrified, and I kept the lights on that night. The following days were horrible. I didn't tell my mom what had happened. I couldn't stay in the dark because I always got the feeling of being watched. Even when I came home from school, trying to unlock the door with my key, the motion-censored lights in the apartment would go off, and I would freak out. I kept having sleep paralysis at least twice every week, but it was never that horrifying like that night, but each time I felt the same pain on the same spot, and it was driving me crazy. I was sleepless and tortured. The noises from the kitchen continued. My mom had a new boyfriend, and when she didn't have a night shift, she would usually stay over at his place. Now that I was completely alone, I had a system in the house where I would keep some lights in other rooms on and turn the one in my room off so I could sleep better but still have some light in the house, especially when I have to use the bathroom at night. I always invited my friends over so that I wouldn't be alone. I was getting good at getting out of the sleep paralysis. I know it sounds weird, but I had to go through it so many times that I somehow trained myself. It felt like a hard workout. About 1.55 years went by like that. I occasionally stole Xanax from my mom's drawer or bought sleeping pills and took 2 so that I could maybe sleep too deep and avoid the nightmares. My relationship with my mom was not good, I was feeling very lonely, and I had to study really hard to get into university. I really wanted to get a cat around the same time. I always wanted a cat when I was a child, but my mom wouldn't allow me to get one. Now that they're divorced and she's not home so much, she agreed. So I got a cat. I was very happy, and weird stuff was almost never happening. Every night I would lie down in bed and say, "Please, God, don't let me have sleep paralysis," so the fear always stayed. A couple of months later, my mom talked to her good friend. This friend had another friend who was apparently spiritual and kind of weird acting, and she also knew someone who was a professional psychic. My mom was already into this stuff, so she made an appointment with the professional psychic. On the scheduled day around noon, the friend of my mom came over with this friend of hers and the psychic guy. He and my mom went to the living room for a private session while my mom's friend, her weird friend, and I were in the kitchen. I made coffee for all of us, and we started chatting. I knew the friend of my mom since I was a child, and we were catching up. I was talking about my school and my dream college when suddenly this woman sitting on my left side interrupted me. She turned her head to me and immediately covered the right side of her face with her hand so that she couldn't see me. She would talk to me while staring at my mom's friend and tell me with a terrified voice, "What did you do here? What did you do in this house? What did you do? What did you do? When she slowly turned her head to me, she would immediately turn it back with a very scared look on her face. My mom's friend looked a bit ashamed that she brought this weird person, and she then asked her why she was looking at her, and she answered, "I'm looking at you, but I'm talking to her," with her finger pointing at me. My mom's friend told her she was scaring me, but she wouldn't stop. She said, "Tell me what happened in this house," and then added, "The doors of this house are opened. They are not locked." I was done. I was petrified and scared as hell. My mom's friend was trying to laugh and turn it into a joke, but I knew what she was talking about. I knew it. I told her about the seance, and she didn't even comment on it. She kept repeating, "The doors are open, the doors are open." She would have her right hand blocking the view towards me next to her right cheek all the time, and whenever she tried to look at me, she would turn her head back dramatically. I slowly got up and left the kitchen. I didn't come back until her psychic friend finished the session with my mom. We all gathered in the living room and had a conversation about the spiritual world, but not about what had happened in the kitchen. When they were leaving, this woman saw my cat, and she told me calmly that my cat was protecting me. Then they left. A couple weeks later, one more weird thing happened. It was actually the most terrifying thing after that particular night with the sleep paralysis. This time, my mom was home and sleeping in her own room. It was late, but I was up, and so was my cat. The door of my room was open. I heard a noise from the right side of my room. When you enter the flat, there is an area for you to leave your keys and hang your coat, like a foyer. The noise was coming from that room, and it sounded like the thin plastic bags my mom used for shopping, as if someone was walking on the bags. First I thought they moved on the floor, but there couldn't be wind. There were no windows open. I immediately freaked out while my cat also heard it and moved towards the sound. I so badly wanted to get up and grab her, but I couldn't move a muscle. I was sitting on my bed when this happened, and I called my cat's name, whispering, telling her to come back. She went to the corridor, sat there in front of my door, and looked in the same direction of the sound. The sound stopped in the meantime. I still couldn't move. I kept calling my cat, and she eventually turned back. When she was in my room again, I decided to get up and close the door. This seemed like an impossible task, but I told myself that I would be very quick. I took a breath, counted backwards from 3, and ran to my door. I closed it and ran back to my bed. I kept the light on my nightstand on and waited. After a couple of minutes, I saw the door handle moving. It was not round, so it was moving up and down. I heard the metal creak. There are no words I can use today to describe the terror I felt. I could barely move my hand to grab my phone because I didn't want to be seen or heard. I wanted to disappear into my bed. I was extremely terrified and scared that it would enter my room and look at me. I grabbed my phone and called my mom next door. I heard her phone ring in her room, and she woke up and answered. She sounded very worried and asked me what was going on, and I just told her to come to my room. She came, and I had to explain to her what happened and what had happened in the past 2 years without any scary details. She might have suggested the spirit calling and even seen that cup move by itself, but she was not ready to completely believe what I was telling her. I understand that because I was not ready to completely believe either. To this day, I keep telling myself that I must have imagined the door handle. I know the cup moved, but the door handle I can't accept. But here I am telling everyone about it. She comforted me and said I could sleep with her, which I did. This was the last terrifying thing that happened to me in that house. In my last year of high school, I decided to go abroad for college. The decision was made for a better education, but in the end I was relieved to get out of that house. My mom and I shared more and more over the years. Knowing I was scared to stay there, she tried some cleansing rituals. I don't know if they worked. I eventually got my cat to where I live now too. When I visit home, I don't stay more than 2 weeks. Shadow mass figures intruding in my home. My first shadow mass event, it was descending our stairs. February of 2019. I had 2 separate encounters with a shadow figure, but I did not see a shadowy formed hat man. I did not see the full silhouette, there was no head. I have seen shadow form legs, 2 legs descending stairs separating light, 1 leg and then another. Then obstructed view and end of incident, apart from a weird feeling of heightened awareness of an intruding presence. Like something is way wrong and out of normal. Was I not meant to notice it there descending the stairs, viewed as a shadow person's legs descending each step, seeing this through the many holes of the pegboard? While sitting on the couch and facing the large Sony television set, which is placed on a low standing wall unit cabinet situated between 2 side bookshelves, I noted that the total height of these glass windowed music and DVD media cabinets is 6.5 feet from the carpeted floor. So basically within this field of view of a 5-foot wide by 3.5 foot tall square viewing area obstructed only by the large TV set at the front at 10 feet from me on the settee. Leaving me a limited 5-foot by 3.5 foot square field of view split at a corner to corner angle from the top left corner down to the lower right, by an angled descending stairway. There are 11 spaced 2 by 2 first square rail poles, spaced just enough to not get my fat head stuck between these spaced 2 by 2 vertical tall rails. However, spaces were just enough apart for my then 4-year-old boy to reach in while upon the stairs and rip out my vast many separate stereo component RCA shielded audio and video wires, of which there were many and all plugged into a vast many specific RCA jack ports per component. A nightmare to be created with all wires suddenly torn out and a couple hours worth of frustrating guesswork in doing a total reconnection. As a father, I was afraid that my young son might electrocute himself if he grabbed the 8 electrical cord plugs located behind the equipment. So I cut and then attached by screwing into the 45-degree angled stairs, hardware, a pegboard perforated with 9/32 diameter, pencil-sized, little round holes. These are 3/16 inch thin pegboard sheets. The holy board hung above your daddy's workbench out in the car garage or in his workshop, upon which he hung all his hand tools on the wall. There are many of these holes, of which, if the stair light is on, it is then backlight emitting enough lighting to show through, but the 60-watt light bulb was hung up upon the wall of the stairwell so it would not be a direct bright backlight, just a soft yellow-white glow, and not directly shining into the holes. But it was backlit, as my son had left the stairwell light on a few hours prior that evening. The shadow person descends the stairs at about the normal speed of descent as I or my wife would walk down. Upon viewing the TV screen, I saw movement of disturbed, broken light through those holes. Just as wide and shaped as a pair of legs, a darkness in continual motion as the many hundreds of pegboard holes suddenly went darker, just as if a pair of legs attached to a tarsal descended the stairs behind the backlit pegboard. One leg and another descending fast. This was rather a disturbing distortion of the backlight and definitely not a possible happening, yet there it was. Downward 5 or 6 steps, then the view again blocked off by the tall wall unit cabinets at the last few bottom steps. I froze when my mind tried to perceive and make sense out of a darker pair of legs descending the stairs. My mind checked all factors to assure all things were as they were supposed to be. All occupants of our home were downstairs. My little son was seated far to my left in the dining room at the dining table, playing with his toys, and I listened to my wife cooking and clanging pots and pans at the stove and then running the sink water at the kitchen sink. Only the 3 of us reside here in our home. My eyes kept checking the stairs as I gazed upon the many hundreds of small, once again backlit 9/32 diameter holes. My mind is telling me logically that although it was shadowed and definitely a movement of downward descent, not a solid form but a significant dark yet transparent mass, it was enough to have made me pause in awe and take great notice of our home's intruder. It was a mind blow, to say the least. It just wasn't supposed to be, so I questioned the reality of what just happened before my eyes. I got up quickly and walked around the wall unit to the stairs and the stairwell, glancing up. It was brightly lit by the single wall-mounted light bulb upon the wall, all clear, no shadow mass to be seen. There were no noticeable changes in room temperature, my late grandmother's oil painting of a European village, or another of flowers with a vase still hanging up there upon the wall. However, the hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up in alarm. At that moment, it felt truly eerie. The second event, it rushed behind and past me. May of 2019. This event occurred while I was alone in the kitchen, where the window blinds were raised and mid-afternoon daylight illuminated the space. It was filtered sunlight, not direct sunbeams coming through the window before me. The kitchen window is 35 by 37 inches with filtered sunlight providing plenty of filtered daylight. At no time during this encounter event were artificial overhead electric light sources needed, and they were turned off. I took these measurements to provide as much environmental data as possible to better help you understand the lighting and kitchen layout. There was no breeze moving leaves up in the cherry tree right outside in the backyard. It was a calm day. There was no air blowing through in the kitchen. Far to my left in the dining room, the overhead circulating blade fan was turning at a very slow speed, and it was nothing from which I could feel a breeze from my present position at the sink. I just finished washing my milk glass and setting it into the countertop drying rack to my right, with the sink right in front of me. I began to pivot to my right when a rush of noticeable darkness, resembling a shadowy mass about 5.5 feet tall and as thick and wide as a hefty man but without limbs or a head, quickly rushed past me, seemingly trying to avoid being seen. Because I turned around, I noticed its passing presence. There was no breeze of motion, and it had no noticeable face or head silhouette, just a form like a voided out person, a dark shadow mass. I was turned around enough to see all this happening, A shadowy form in my direct sight of field of vision upon a quarter turn to my right. This was not a peripheral side of eye sighting. I actually watched as this shadow figure rushed past behind me, passing me by, as a few seconds prior, I was busy and facing the kitchen sink. It had a large mass but not a solid blackness. It was a shadowed voiding of the light as it took up space and light both. It was a substance of darkness of nothingness but not a voided blackness. But its entirety changed the light within its taken up space. It occupied, to call it, a shadow figure. I am uncertain if the shadow figure was human, but it appeared large and quickly moved past me, entering the small laundry room through the doorless archway before disappearing. At the sink I took up 18 inches of space where I stood, and from the sink to the oven/stove behind me, it was only 44 inches of total space, of which I took up 18 inches of that floor space. The shadow figure took up a space of about 19 to 20 inches, as at 26 inches it would have been into the front oven door and handle of the stove range. It moved with a great non-pausing rush, not an extremely fast flash. It was fast but slow enough that I had a few good seconds to watch it go by me into the joining laundry room, and on through the open archway across the floor. It traveled in my sight for at least 106 inches across that floor, and then it disappeared out of sight as it moved through it. It was then as nothingness. Stunned, perplexed, and yet amused, I consider myself a practical man, not a skeptic, based on my experiences over 6 decades. I stood there with slight hesitation, then I stepped fast as I followed its path. The laundry room was well lighted from the filtered sunlight coming in through the kitchen window. There were no obstacles or obstructions. It was a clear south to north straight line pathway upon the floor, and I walked back into the area well lit by the filtered sunlight coming from the bathroom window. It was gone. I was left with far more curiosity than with fear, and I felt as if my home was intruded upon yet once again by a shadow mass. That was the last I saw of the shadow figure in our home here. Lastly, to add, it was silent the entire time. However, I did feel uneasy, and my hackles went up when it moved behind me. True and terrifying events. Okay, this is a long one considering how outrageous my experiences are and how frequently they occurred. I live in NY. About a 40-minute drive north of NYC. And these experiences I am about to write here have been the most insane and the scariest events to have ever happened to me in my life. It makes horror movies look like Sesame Street. Now I've always been a believer in all things paranormal. I've had strange experiences my whole life, but nothing that can even come close to comparing with what had happened from November 2017 to December 2017 and onwards into January 2018 and still to this day. But the worst of it had all happened from November to the end of December 2017. These experiences have completely changed me as a person. I never thought it possible for anything like this to be able to happen, and to be perfectly honest, even though I am and always have been a strong believer in the supernatural and paranormal, if I hadn't experienced this all firsthand and someone else were to tell me these stories, it would be hard for me to believe. But I assure you, every single thing I am about to write here is 100% truth, no exaggerations, no fabrications. And luckily I had someone else with me throughout 99% of these events, otherwise I would have been convinced I was going insane if it was only happening to me. But I have some photo proof, video proof, and audio proof of a small number of these events. At one point I had even gone to the hospital ER to get checked out, actually on 2 separate occasions, to have tests done, blood work, an EKG, and a psych evaluation. At one point I did feel as if I was losing my mind. I'll get to that later in the story though. Everything checked out 100% fine BTW, proving I was 100% healthy mentally and physically. On to the story. So it all started actually with a friend of mine. She lives in an apartment, and at the time she was living alone. It is a somewhat small apartment with 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. The living room and kitchen are basically the same room, although spacious, they are connected. To enter the apartment, you come in through the door downstairs. Directly to your left is a flight of stairs. Once you're at the top, there's a window to your left with an old fire escape, and directly to your right is the door that opens up to the apartment. When you walk in, you have the door to the first bedroom to your left, take a few steps forward, and the door to the second bedroom is on your left as well. Then directly straight is the counter with a stove on the far left, the sink on the far right, cabinets and cupboards, etc. The refrigerator is to the right. Back up a bit and look to your right, and there's the rest of the room, or living room, you could call it. The bathroom door is to the far right as well, and that's the setup of the apartment. Not too sure if anyone cares to know all of that, but I figured since I'm going into pretty great detail with this story, I may as well give a detailed description of the layout of the apartment as well. Now in the living room there is only 1 black leather futon sitting on the far side of the apartment, opposite the bedroom doors and right near the bathroom door, with a window to the left of the futon with a fire escape outside of the window that is connected to the fire escape at the other window mentioned earlier. Okay then, you now know the entire layout of the apartment, so as I tell the events, you can get an idea of where in the house it was happening and what the surroundings looked like. Now on to the actual events. It all started with a phone call. I was at my home on the other side of town when I got a phone call from my friend. She was a bit frantic and shaken up. She was asking me if I could get over to her apartment fast because she had locked herself in her bedroom because she had thought there was an intruder or a squatter in her apartment. I asked her what was up, and she went on to tell me that she had heard some slight noise in the living room, and when she looked out of her bedroom, she caught the blanket and sheets on the futon being very clearly pulled under the futon, as if someone was underneath the couch and was pulling the sheet and blanket in order to cover and hide themselves from being seen under the futon. So naturally I got into my car and bolted over there as fast as possible. Once I arrived, I ran upstairs and let myself in the apartment. I had my knife out and ready in case there was a confrontation with some crazy squatter bum. I walked in and went right to the futon and yelled out, "Whoever is under this couch better come out now, because if I look under here and see you, there's going to be some serious problems for you." I got no answer. So I pulled the sheets and blanket off and looked. No one and nothing was there. I got my friend to unlock her door and come out and assured her there was no one here. She knew what she saw, and I didn't doubt her, but there was definitely no one in the apartment. And that event began the ever-growing insanity from that exact second onwards. Just a quick note, I had stayed there at the apartment prior to this, and there were never any problems. Never heard or saw anything, never got any type of strange feelings. And I've slept in both her bedroom with her and on the futon in the room alone, never having an issue prior to all of this. So at one point while I was there at the house with her for the day to provide company and comfort so she could feel safe knowing that if there was actually an intruder popping in and out of the house somehow, she'd have some sense of security knowing that I was there and I most definitely would never let anything ever happen to her. As I'm there, she runs to me in the kitchen and grabs me hard by the arm and tells me to shush, then points to the next door vacant room and tells me to listen and to tell her what I hear. I slowly make my way to the door and press my ear to the door. Sure enough, I hear what sounds like whistling and faint conversation. I step back a second, a bit wide-eyed, and ask who's in the room. She assures no one and asks what I hear. I tell her I hear whistling and conversing. She flips a bit and says to me, "See? So you hear it?" I assured her yes, and it was at that point I knew for a fact that this wasn't a home invasion or a squatter, etc. I looked in the room, and it was empty and quiet. I told her immediately that this isn't some home invasion, at least not by humans. It wasn't. I've heard and seen this before, and this was textbook paranormal. For a bit after that event, she was convinced someone was breaking into the house or a squatter was living in the walls, which made me laugh. I lost it when she said that and told her to think logically. I told her, "You think there's some cold squatter bum living in your walls who's talking to themselves and or someone else and just walking between the walls and whistling, hearing and knowing you're home? Give me a break, Lamau." So she proceeded to call the police on more than one occasion, and each time they came, they took a look around and found no one and each time looked at her as if she was completely crazy. I demanded she stop calling the police at this point because I knew for a fact that this was paranormal. I knew it 100%. And police won't and can't do shit about this. At this point I told her I'd move in with her for a bit to keep her company and see what's up, as well as keep her safe, well, as safe as I could against unseen forces. At the first time of me hearing the slight whispers and whistling, I was immediately intrigued and wanted to check this out more. In reality, from what had come from me being there for such a long period of time, I kind of wish I had just stayed away. At the same time, though, as terrifying as these events were and became, I'm glad I was able to fully experience what I had experienced because most people won't ever have run-ins with demons and or the paranormal the way I have during these events. I take it as a blessing and a curse. A good and a bad. Although there are a select few events I could have done without ever experiencing due to the intense and sheer terror they caused, and I do mean terror, anyway. So at this point I'm now staying with her at her apartment. It's just me and her, and these demons, for which I'm unsure how demons actually work, but from what I was able to physically see and feel, it was like we were surrounded by tons of them. And when I say see, I literally mean see. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I was seeing full-form horns, spiked tails, or red evil pitchfork demons like from literature or movies. These things were different. Maybe they appear different to everyone, I can't answer that. But what these things looked like, the best I can describe them is that when you saw them, it was like having your eyes blurry a bit but mixed with a thick air patch, almost like rippling water, or when you can see the heat dissipate from the hood of a car on a hot summer day. Basically it was like some form of interruption in normal air or waves or whatever you can call it, a mix of thicker than normal air, static, rippling water, and dissipating heat waves. Where were the strange, thick air energy beings? They also had a form of some sort, very human-like, with a head, arms, legs, torso, and so on. Just static looking, see-through, and thicker than air and very visible. Some were small, some were big, some were short, some were tall, and then there were monstrous ones, which were terrifying even more so than the others. I'll get to those ones in a bit. Now, I make it sound like I'm talking as if all of them were different entities. I can't answer if they were or not. I feel these things take on whatever form they want to use in order to cause fear to a great degree. Now I know there was definitely more than just one due to one event that I'll get to shortly. Anyway, I'm staying with her at her home now, day and night, and the activity picked up at an extremely fast pace. The first night we are staying in her room, lying in bed, all of a sudden, it has to be 3 to 4 a.m. You can hear what sounds like footsteps all around the living room and kitchen, and then you hear, very clearly, "Hey kitties." We both look at each other with clear WTF looks on our faces, then the cats meow, then you hear more footsteps and what sounds like something playing with the cats outside the bedroom door. My friend slowly makes her way to the door and gets an overwhelming stench of rotting flesh / rotten eggs / sulfur. The second I was aware of this, my heart skipped a beat, and I knew immediately that this was not good. So my friend makes a noise, and you hear what sounds like a little girl's voice, and then fast, rapid footsteps run to the door, open the door, slam it shut, and run down the steps to the bottom door. The bottom door swings open and then slams shut. At this point I'm now beginning to become officially freaked the duck out. As most would, I would imagine. After a little time passes, we hear the doors open and shut again, and this thing / these things come back upstairs and into the kitchen / living room and continue to make noise. Footsteps, sometimes light like a child and then sometimes extremely heavy and loud like an 8 feet tall, 350 pounds man stomping in boots. The cupboards would open and slam shut, whispers and then very clear and loud conversations between a man and a woman. Once hearing the lady say, "Shh, they can hear us." At one point I slowly pressed my ear up against the wall and heard an immediate growling directly where my ear was, almost like it was right between the wall. We made it through that night with no sleep until the activity ceased at about 8 a.m. It would still go on during the day but not as bad, at least not at this point in time. Now after a few days and nights of these same events happening over and over, that is when it began to spiral out of control. At one point she and I had gone around to different shops in search of help, advice, and items that could help put an end to this. We had bought sage, different kinds of powders to burn, candles and such, and this one stuff a lady suggested, she called it eggshell or something. It was this hard, white, chalky stuff that we were instructed to break up and put around entrances to keep these entities out. So we got home and set everything up. I put lines of this eggshell stuff in front of the bedroom door, the windows, and such. I burned sage and powders around the home, said prayers, and prayed for the protection of Jesus and warrior angels to provide a hedge of protection around us, the home, etc. We went into the bedroom that night, and as usual, all the activity in the other rooms continued, but this time it was way worse, louder, and more violent. Items being thrown, breaking, doors slamming, loud vocal noises, lights going on and off, sinks being turned on full blast, showers as well, etc. It went nuts but never entered the bedroom, yet. We got maybe 20 minutes of sleep very early in the AM. As I got up to unlock the bedroom door and look at the damage, I noticed everything was perfectly in place. Nothing was broken, the sinks were on, though, and that's when I saw it. The eggshell line I placed at the door was smudged all over, almost like this thing / these things made it a point to show and say, "Hey, this shit won't do a damn thing against me, buddy." Then I saw them, clear as day, footprints leading from the eggshell line to the kitchen, right to the sink that was turned on, then leading to the one open cupboard, then to the bathroom where the door was open and the sink and shower were on, then leading back to the vacant room next to hers and into the room right into the closet, and that's it. I couldn't believe it. The thing is the footprints were all different sizes and all had 6 toes. Some were like baby footprints, some like a giant's, and some normal sized, and then there were 2 to 3 that were like nothing I've ever seen before. It was like a 3-clawed hoof type of print, very strange looking. So we went the rest of the day, and the activity continued now even during the daytime. It was on that day when the main, big entity made itself known. You were able to tell that whatever this thing was, it was the one in charge. It was huge and had a very powerful negative energy to it, a very low, rumbling vibration that was able to be felt and heard. And it would follow me around the home non-stop. When I moved, it moved right after me, staying literally on top of me, and when it would get right on top of /and/on me, I could smell it. It wasn't like sulfur, but it was a putrid, pungent smell and extremely strong, it would make me gag. And the strangest thing, I really hope that I can get some answers on this one, whenever it was around, we would hear this three-tone noise, over and over. It wasn't like singing, and it wasn't an instrument, it was like an electronic sounding kind of thing, but it would do it over and over and over. The best way to describe the noise is that it was 3 tones, each tone lasting about 1 to 2 seconds each and going downwards in pitch 1 note for each tone. Like do, the first tone being the highest, then the second being a note lower, and the third a note lower again, which would repeat over and over. And you could pinpoint where this large entity was just by the tones it made. Wherever you heard that noise, you would look towards that direction, and there it was, large and static looking, like a grotesque, monstrous thing. Cut to the nighttime now, and we began to see tons of these static entities now all around the house and the large tone making one lingering around. But for this night it was surprisingly calm, and this was the night that the biggest mistake happened. Seeing as it was calm, the girl with me was talking to these things, asking them to please remain this way and to please not make loud noises and to please stop scaring us, and so on, and then she asked them to do things. Ask them to move a plate on the counter, and the plate comes up about 1 inch and starts to spin. Ask them to spin a cigarette on the floor, and it begins to spin. Ask them to turn the light off, and you watch the light switch slowly get pushed down till click, and the light goes off. But everything they did was very slowly and almost seemed weak. Later in the night she says, "Okay, we want to get rest, so please stay calm like this and quiet so we can get some sleep." We then see what looked like a dozen or more leg imprints form on the couch in the living room after we see the static beings move towards the couch. We close and lock the bedroom door and lie down to try to sleep. Maybe 15 to 20 minutes pass, and we both begin to see these static entities come walking into the bedroom, right through the door. My heart is pounding just writing this right now. One after the other comes in, and one by one they come up to the bed and begin to pile on top of me. I feel like I'm being pushed down by tons of pressure, but I'm able to get up and move without a problem. I just put my head down and close my eyes as each one piles onto me. I didn't even say anything to my friend, but she feels the bed moving and looks over at me, and I hear her say, "Holy shit," with her voice sounding very fearful. I say, "I know." I open my eyes, and I can barely see. The static look to these things was now all around me, and I was, like, looking through them. Everything was rippling, wavy, and static. And I heard and felt an intense low vibration that made the whole bed vibrate. I had the idea that since these things were emitting such low frequencies, maybe if we played high frequency sounds, it would get them away. It did work kind of at first, but they would come right back at me. So we fled the house and drove around all night till the morning. But the big entity, the one making the 3-tone noise that followed, didn't bother us but was just there the whole time, like it was watching us or keeping tabs on us or something. And as we left the house, we looked up at the windows and saw shadowy figures looking out the windows at us. The morning comes, and we eventually go back to the house. The activity continues through the day and then into the night. Now this night it got even weirder. We would look outside and see what can only be described as hybrid demon animals. Not walking around but just stationary, but you could see them trembling at an extreme rate, like they were twitching or vibrating or something. Their eyes glowed similarly to a cat's in the dark. Sometimes they would look like a wolf mixed with a monkey or something. It was really weird. And we would hear what sounded like a huge horde or flock or group, whatever, of flying things circling the house, and it made the entire home shake. Like the entities called for backup or something, and they were in a huge flock circling the home. It really freaked me out hardcore. And it was only me and her who would hear and see all this happening. Anytime we'd have someone else come over, either nothing would happen, or things would happen but very slightly, and the other person or persons never saw or heard a single thing. So whatever these things were, it was me and her that were being singled out and literally tormented by these entities. The next night we decided to stand our ground because it's been weeks now of this getting worse and worse. We stayed in the living room and sat on the couch, and I held her to give her as much comfort as I could. That's when the big 3-tone making entity came at me and on top of me. It almost felt like it was trying to enter my body. So I pulled up this prayer video to cleanse and ward off demons, and as I played it, this thing got a very hostile, angry, and restless feeling. It would run off, and we would hear the whole time the loud sound of the flying, buzzing horde circling the outside of the house. Sounding like it was getting closer and closer, but as I kept praying and repeating the prayer video, they would back up quite a ways, but each time the prayer stopped, they would come back, getting closer and closer. So I was freaking out and playing the prayer nonstop to keep them from coming. Each time the big entity would run off and then come back, but it would come back bigger than before, I kid you not. This cycle continued for over an hour or two, each time that large entity returning bigger than before until the final time. This is where I almost literally pissed and shit myself, no joke. It came back this one final time between praying, and this time it was gigantic. As we heard it come running, stomping towards us, we saw flashes of red light on the walls near us, and as it got very close to us, its static-looking form took on a different form this time. It was way more visible, almost taking on a near-solid form for a quick second, and was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. I grab my friend as tight as I can, pull the blanket over our heads, and start yelling prayers. This time it didn't run off right away but was yanking the blanket off of us, and I was holding onto the blanket and her with all my life and strength, screaming, praying, and almost in tears from straight fear. I was convinced in my mind that this was it. This all escalated to this point, and now this thing is going to take me or us away or do something intense. After a few minutes of this, it stopped for a bit, but we would still hear the three-tone noise in the other room and the closet, and the cupboards were opening and slamming. We heard what sounded like a clear, audible group of people in the other room talking and what sounded like a Spanish kid talking on a phone in the bathroom, flushing the toilet, and using the sink. And it continued like that the rest of the night. The morning finally comes, and it calms down a bit but still continues. The big entity following me around smelled putrid and also now smelled like the sage we had burnt, but it was overwhelming and stank so bad I was near puking. Like it was laughing at the fact we even tried sage. Almost mocking us. At one point my friend is in the bathroom, and I'm standing right at the door to keep her feeling as comfortable as possible. Between the open crack of the back of the door, I see this all-black thing just floating there, staring at me through the crack. It was just like a floating torso, upper body, and head. It wasn't static or clear, it was solid black. And its face was all black except for its eyes. Wide open, never blinking, all black large pupil area with a tiny bit of bright white on the outside, just staring at me. I didn't say a word to my friend because if she didn't notice it, then I didn't want her to even see this thing. Things continued on like this for days and days, never letting up, never stopping, and always getting worse. After quite some time it was Christmas Eve, and I was going to go be with my family, and she was going to her family as well. We needed a break from that place, so I get to my family's home, and the second I'm there, I feel the big three-tone entity there with me. I start to freak, thinking, no way this thing is here with me right now. How? Why? As I get near anything electronic, I hear static and electronic disturbance through speakers, radios, headphones, and TVs. My tablet, laptop, phone, and TV screens would glitch and flicker. Everywhere I looked I was being made to see these demonic visions, literally everywhere, and there was this large purple mist that was flowing around me. I had this horrid taste in my mouth like rotting flesh and that putrid smell that the entity would give off, non-stop. I couldn't eat or drink anything due to this putrid taste. Now, my family household is Christian. I was brought up Christian, and my mother especially is very strong in her faith. It gets to be Christmas night, and I ask my family that we come together to pray over me. So we all came together to pray over me at this point, and it got extremely intense. As the praying became stronger, I could feel these things coming off of me. I had my eyes glued shut as we prayed and at one point opened them up to see a dark black mist in between us all. As my eyes are tightly shut and we continue to pray, it is as if something is trying to pry my eyes open. And as that would happen, I would catch quick glimpses of these terrifying things all around. Towards the end of the prayers, I catch a quick glimpse of this huge, tall entity that took the form of a man, about 8 to 9 feet tall and huge, I mean, solid. Wearing what looked almost like a tattered suit. And a bunch of smaller, demonic-looking entities all around this large thing. And I feel a tugging on my body, near my legs, like something was attempting to hold on and not let go as strongly as it could. After about 30 minutes of praying, we all just stop. The taste in my mouth was gone, the smell was gone, and I felt lighter, but I could still feel as if there was one entity still left with me. I know for a fact it was still there, but my mother kept telling me that she didn't feel or sense anything and it was in my head now and that everything will be fine. But I knew for a fact that there was still at least one thing still with me. Now it calmed down after this a lot, but that night as I tried to sleep, I would hear the loud thumping of a heavy entity coming upstairs into my room and right on top of me, but this time now it always smelled like fabric burning, like nylon or something, like my clothing or bed was on fire. I kept waking my mother up to come pray with me more, and she kept telling me that there was nothing and not to worry, but it was there, I know it. It was still so intense there was no way it was just my mind tricking me. So we go to the hospital to get me checked out, just to rule out insanity or something wrong with me internally or something. Everything checks out fine. I get a psych evaluation, and they say I'm perfectly sane. Never in my life up till this point have I ever been looked at as crazy or insane. And it was beginning to get me extremely frustrated. This entity was trying to make me look like I was a nutcase to the world. All this continued on for about 2 weeks at my home. Things were walking around me as I sat on the couches, my bed, or anywhere. It smelled like my clothing was on fire, and I would feel intense heat on parts of my body until I would move away from this entity, and it would follow me and get right on me again every time. One night I was exiting my room, the hall light was on, and I was going to go downstairs. As I get near the steps, my parents' bedroom is in front of me a ways, and I immediately feel fear and danger. I start to pray out loud, and at that exact moment this 8 feet plus tall black mist comes charging at me from my parents' bedroom and begins to circle around me extremely fast and is screaming and barking in my ears very loudly. It wasn't like it was one person screaming, though. It sounded like multiple screams. I lost it. I stopped praying and fell to the floor and started to scream in fear like I'd never felt before. My mother comes running and grabs me and holds onto me tight, and I feel a tugging on my torso and hear a slight growling to my right. It was extremely terrifying. That was the last big, intense event. After that it would start to calm down as days passed but was still there. I'd feel it and see it and smell it all the time. At night when trying to sleep, I'd see the static entities, and they would be pulling the blanket off of me and entering under the blanket, poking at me with what felt like pinpricks and such. One night they were drawing images on my microfiber blanket. Intricate, detailed images of demons holding up middle fingers, and other weird stuff. One of the images was of what looked like an arm coming out from underneath me where I sat and then a hand. Like it was waving and saying, "Hey, I possessed you" or something. It freaked me out. I started to record as much as I could with my video camera after this, and I have this one extremely clear, freaked out video of a solid black thing silently darting past in front of the camera. Things continued for a bit of time but began to dissipate until things went back to normal, kind of. I still to this day see shadow forms here and there dart around and just have a general feeling like this thing is still around but waiting dormant or something. I can't better explain it. Is this thing still around? Is it possible that out of nowhere, be it within the next day or so or years down the road, that all of a sudden this can all happen again? My entire life has been changed by these experiences. What can anyone make of all this? What the hell went down here? And does anyone out there have any answers as to why that one entity made that 3-tone noise constantly? Because I've searched everywhere and can't find any information on that specifically.